everyone. Thank you and welcome back to yet another episode of what I have chosen to call A History of Rock and Roll in Film and Rock and Roll. You may call it what you like. And this time we're going to finish off the Richie Valens saga, the La Bamba saga, and I'm going to end up processing a whole lot of stuff in real time. It's as emotional as the previous one for me, and there's some interesting surprises for me along the way. There are also what I hope to be some thought-provoking asides and some tangents I go off on throughout a couple of portions of the episode. So get yourself comfortable on your Radish Mattress, who we are hopefully, fingers crossed, very, very close to finalizing a very lucrative endorsement deal with, depending on how the crops kind of come up this year. We are already deep into the radish season, as many of you I'm sure know. The radish jerky is flying off the shelves, and radish shoes are big in Milan this year. So hopefully with that, rise in interest, the Radish Mattress folks will finally commit to this endorsement deal for A History of Rock and Roll in film and rock and roll that we've been hammering out between our lawyers for quite some time now. Now, if this was a normal podcast, this is where we would say, but first it's time for some mail or some comment reviews, or it's time to talk about the fallout from the last episode. And on A History of Rock and Roll and film and rock and roll, you get none of that for your money. And I hope you like it that way. I hope you like the fact that there's no co-host. There's no time being flumbled around right now with the two or three of us talking about our day or our week or how the dog is doing or how the husband or wife is doing or how the kids are doing or any chit-chat about lunch. That's what I provide for you, a lack of things. And I salute you for being cultured enough to value that. I feel like I provide for you a lack of things should be a t-shirt. Should it be? Call in. Let me know. This episode will also have the second half of my direct reading from a little old Richie Valens guitar book that we covered a large chunk of last time. Other than that, everything else was recorded new because that bit was featured in Patreon previously. It's, again, so far, the only segment from Patreon that has been ported over to the main feed. And the last year and a half of me researching and prepping and recording stuff for the Patreon. I will talk more about it later, but hey, if you're curious, there's a link to the Patreon in the description of every episode of A History of Rock and Roll and Film and Rock and Roll that has come out since the Patreon started. It's only a few bucks a month. You get now 3 hours of extra content every month, but if you're starting in now, you have access to many hours of content that you haven't heard yet. It's all fairly, historically oriented. It's not, yammering about what's going on in entertainment today. It's a whole lot of deep dives on stuff that doesn't relate to any one artist or film in a long-term sense. So I had to get that stuff out somehow, some other way. Now we will launch straight into Richie to Lou Diamond Phillips to Luis Valdez and the saga of La Bamba. We'll get back into various aspects of Richie's life and career and the film itself and the making of it. Here we go. Switching timelines now. To now read some excerpts from an article called La Bamba and the Lives It Changed from 2021, New York Times. It's profiling Lou Diamond Phillips and Luis Valdez as they look back more than 3 decades at how the biopic did and didn't make waves in Hollywood. Jesus Christ, if you're going to age and you have the choice to age like Lou Diamond Phillips, for Christ's sakes, take that deal. Dude looks cool. He looks his age, but he looks cool. He doesn't have any weird like facial surgery creepiness going on, but also his skin hasn't started to hang down past his collarbones yet. Jesus, he looks badass. I mean, I'm sure the clothes and a nice haircut do help, but dude's kept himself in shape. In his shape, in a normal, Lou Diamond Phillips kind of shape, he does just look like that person, but older by about 30 years. It's amazing. It talks. I won't. I say this every time I do this. I'm not going to read the whole thing, and then every now and then I get kind of roped into a really good article, and I do tend to read most of it. But I will save the verbatim recitation for the Patreon episodes and the Richie Valens history coming up later in this episode. Part 2 of the history that was started in the previous La Bamba episode that you hopefully have already heard. It starts with a little basic, generic background on the movie, what it was about, and when Valens dies. The short-lived career of a Latino teenager didn't exactly bring Hollywood executives running. What were dubbed ethnic stories weren't considered box office draws. An early article in the Los Angeles Times paraphrased marketing specialists who privately feared that La Bamba, written and directed by a Latino playwright, Luis Valdez, and starring an unknown actor of Filipino descent, Lou Diamond Phillips, would fall fatally short of expectations and sour Hollywood on other films about Latinos. Yet the biopic, made for just $6.5 million, went on to gross more than $54 million. Adjusted for inflation, that's more than $120 million. Phillips says, La Bamba became the flagship of what many thought was going to be a Latino wave in Hollywood, but it never took hold enough to where it became a mainstay. And Valdez adds, in that sense, then, La Bamba is unique and fresh because not very much has been around to compete with it. It's considered one of the must-see Latino stories in cinematic history, says the interviewer. How does it feel that a film you created over 3 decades ago is so influential? And Valdez says, it feels both good and bad in a way. It's good that the movie is relevant, that it's up to date, and that people can enjoy it because of what it is. At the same time, there should be dozens of movies like La Bamba representing the Latino experience. Not just the Latino experience, but the minority experience as a whole in America. What it means to be American. It most definitely has multicultural roots, but it subscribes to the same basic universal concerns in every person's life: the family, work, hope, ambition, dreams, desires. And it's relevant in that sense because those things never go away. Those are human and eternal. Phillips says, we would like to have been further along at this point in time. What I've seen, I think, for the last 20 years is a very vocal African-American community and very motivated and determined producers, directors, and writers. Whether you have Tyler Perry, Ava DuVernay, or Shonda Rhimes, you had these creators who became touchstones to opening up your own shop. Luis was a pioneer in that. He just didn't get enough people to follow up in his footsteps. The interviewer points out that, Valdez just referred to the film as an American story. It inspired many first- and second-generation American Latino kids to dream big. Why is there such a barrier to putting an American label on what is considered an ethnic story? I think it is a question of the American narrative. What story are we telling here, and from whose point of view? We've all been sold on the idea of the Pilgrims in 1492 and Europe coming and so forth, right? Well, that should include the story of Mexico, which is another country altogether as far as the American narrative is concerned. But actually, the whole thing has to be reviewed again. There's a need to rewrite the narrative, to look at the narrative again and say, okay, what is an American? What does it mean to be American? We all live ordinary lives. We don't have to be gang members. We don't have to be criminals. We don't have to be drug addicts. We don't have to be violent. We could be normal people that go to the shopping centers and buy food and clothes for our kids and just send them to school. We have the life that is represented in all the movies that deal with white people. They get the whole range. Minorities don't. They get locked into a stereotype. And the more violent and more exotic and the stranger it is, supposedly the more commercial. Well, that's a lie. Valdez is asked about his filmmaking career after La Bamba. He wrote and directed a few TV movies, then went back to theater. He says, I became a filmmaker years after I was a union organizer and founder of El Teatro Campesino and a college professor. I went to a number of other things. I went back to teaching as well. As one of the founding professors at Cal State Monterey Bay, I started this thing called the Institute for Teledramatic Arts and Technology, which anticipated some of the changes that are going on now with streaming and such. But frankly, there was a great deal of difficulty in trying to get new projects that I wanted to do. They offered me things I didn't want to do, so I decided not to because I had other options. They bring up that he had mentioned in the late 90s a possible sequel to La Bamba following Richie's brother Bob. He says, it seemed to me there was an extension of the story. I had followed Bob for the movie. God bless him, he died a couple of years ago. He was 81 with a mohawk and an earring. He was just a sensational person to know and to enjoy really as a friend. There was a story there that had to do with the extension of the history of rock and roll and how we went from the 50s into the 60s. The vehicle to get there was really Bob's through line. So I pitched this idea to a number of producers and couldn't get a hook. I think, quite frankly, we don't have enough producers that understand the minority experience in America. They always go to the same things, the violence, the drugs, and the sensationalism, thinking that's what's going to sell. More often than not, it's the quiet human story that finally connects with people, which I think is the secret to La Bamba. Lou Diamond Phillips, when asked about how it changed him, talks about how it underlined and galvanized my own dream. I was reading with Bob for a few days, and then one day Luis walked past me. I was sitting in the hall. He goes, tomorrow you read for Richie. I remember walking along Pico Boulevard thinking, man, oh God, I've been wrapping my head around Bob. Now how do I play Richie? The epiphany that came to me was, I'm already Richie. I'm a kid with a big dream. The desire to go after it. The whole process of becoming Richie and having that catapult me the way it did, it changed my life. I had a philosophy. It's going to change my life, but it's not going to change me. The experience made me introspective for the rest of my career, not feeling like I was entitled to this, that I was fortunate, and to never, ever be less than grateful. Valdez mentions that Richie and him were from the same generation. I was in high school when rock and roll hit back in the 50s, and I can understand Richie's ambitions because I had the same ambitions. We were all gung-ho Americans back then, and I dreamt that all the opportunities were available to me. If I wanted to do whatever, if I wanted to be a rock star, I could. And Richie had that dream, and he acted on it. And the same thing happened with me in the theater. I mean, there was no Latino theater when I started, and I realized no one else has done it, so I'll do it. I began to write plays in 1960. It was a whole different world then. That's why I identify with Richie. He died for it, but he lived his dreams. Now, in the film La Bamba, there's a very prominent, important scene where Richie and the Silhouettes play a dance for a nice big crowd and families serving refreshments. Some notes about this actual event are featured in the upcoming book, Come On Baby, Just Rock, 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 by Corey Long, and it is also featured in a Facebook post on the Richie Valens Facebook page about Lil Richie and his crying guitar, spelled R-I-C-H-I. And it says, the mortgage payment for Richie's mother, Concha's house, was $65 a month. One way or another, it'd get scrounged together thanks to her jobs serving tables and cleaning houses, all while tending to her two small daughters and infant son. As her son gained more of a following, Concha quite bravely saw a business opportunity. In January 1958, the mortgage money would be used to pay the $57 fee for renting the San Fernando American Legion Hall, Post 176. This included the cost of security and a janitor. Admission for this dance, then, to make the money back, right, is $1.25 per person or $2 per couple, which is a great way to encourage people to bring a date, right? Because then the guy's going to have to, spend some money on the refreshments. Because Cokes and Concha's homemade tamales were on sale. That dance, headlined by the Silhouettes with a singer named Richie Valenzuela, coincidentally, brought in $125, a pretty good return on the rent money. Another element that does make La Bamba such a compelling film compared to other rock bios is the family element that's featured so prominently, and I think it is very important to feature that. It is relevant to see the big picture. This is, there's more going on than just a music hero and his rise to stardom and then tragic death. All right, with a movie like La Bamba, I think we're ripe for a trip over to tvtropes.org and a little review of some of the tropes that they've identified in this film. Not going to be, it's not interesting enough to read the entire list, but there's some good ones in here. And one of them, for me, is the definitive version of this particular trope. But we'll get to that in a second. There are notes at the top about the movie. It talks about how popular the film was, among other things, how it helped lift Lou Diamond Phillips to fame. Its soundtrack went double platinum in the U.S. and propelled the titular song La Bamba to number 1 on the Billboard Hot 187. The Los Lobos version was number 1 for 3 weeks and finished 11 at the end of 87. So this film contains examples of the following tropes, and to read some of them: anti-role model, Bob to Richie; adaptational attractiveness, and this is when the film version in the adaptation is, aesthetically more pleasing to audience than would be the historical subject. And it says, while Valens wasn't bad looking in real life, Diamond Phillips had movie star looks in comparison. Arc words. Come On, Let's Go, the title of one of Valens' most famous hits, and repeatedly dropped by multiple characters in this film. Artistic license dash history. While the basic outline of Richie's rise to fame is accurate, there's also a fair amount of outright fictionalization, especially in the Richie Bob scenes. For one thing, Richie didn't actually learn the title song at a Tijuana brothel. He had known it since he was a kid. That's kind of a big one. I think that's worth making people aware of, that was just sort of created for more dramatic impact, I guess, or for a sort of sleazier element to the story of this innocent character. The other one it says is the coin toss between Richie and Tommy Allsup really took place back at the ballroom after the show, not on the airport runway. Yeah, who cares? But Big Brother worship, Richie to Bob. Bookends. The film begins and ends with the instrumental "Sleepwalk" by Santo and Johnny. And if you don't know that one off the top of your head and you haven't watched the movie in a while, it's that instrumental kind of slide guitar. Breaking the bad news gently. Yes, Donna is told to sit down before she gets the news about Richie. Dating what daddy hates. A lot of the early drama comes from Donna's father not liking her dating a Chicano. Her father buys her a car so he won't walk her home. And as soon as Valen leaves for a music career, he takes the car away from her. And I highly recommend you go to YouTube, look up Santo and Johnny Sleepwalk from Dick Clark's American Bandstand, and when he introduces them, and hear the girls going, woo! He starts talking about this duo of brothers that wrote this song. They wrote an instrumental hit, for crying out loud. Like, Jesus Christ, how could you not just get all kinds of hot love and action if you were anything close to a rock and roll musician back then? The dudes look sharp as hell, and the one brother is standing up playing a hollow body, like a sort of archtop jazz style guitar. I can't quite make out what the name is on the headstock. It looks pretty Gretschy, but what appears to be the younger brother who plays the main melody is playing this Fender like lap steel, 3-neck lap steel contraption. Not 3 necks, but it's one solid block. But I see 3 sets of pegs, tuner pegs on there. So he's got 3 different tunings on the thing, so you can just rock a whole set of songs without having to change tuning. It's pretty slick looking. Back to TV tropes, though. What was it? Foregone conclusion. Yeah, the song's about the day the music died, which means everybody already knows Richie dies in the end. Foreshadowing. I'm going to be a star, but stars don't fall out of the sky, do they? Hate sink. Hate sink. Let's look up what their definition of that is. That is a character who is intentionally made by the work's creator to be vile and unsympathetic to the audience, while your average jerk ass or complete monster, those are both selections you can click on, can fill the bill. An ordinary scumbag works just fine, especially in stories where the main antagonist has no face. Such a film about a natural disaster or killer animal acting out of instinct rather than malice, or the big bad's motives remain sympathetic even when their deeds are evil. This character is written to draw ire and to provide appropriate catharsis for the audience when karma finally catches up to them. Oh boy. And then they compare it to the Scrappy. Hate sink is not the Scrappy. The writers wrote the hate sink to be hated, while the Scrappy garnered a hatedom of his own on his own. But it is possible for a hate sink to become a Scrappy if the audience hates him for reasons other than what the creators intended. The Scrappy. Oh, it's Scrappy-Doo? Hatedom for a character. Okay. The character that the audience hates to see. It is not enough the character be hated, however, for any character to truly solidify themselves as a Scrappy in the eyes of the audience. All the following criteria have to be met. I'm getting off track, aren't I? There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then there's a ton of other notes below that. You can check that out on your own. So to summarize, the hate sink is a character created by the author with the express intention of being loathed by the audience. The Scrappy is a character which is not created to be loathed, but still is. So the hate sink in the case of La Bamba is Donna's father is a borderline racist control freak who goes way out of his way to prevent her and Richie from seeing each other. And then the leader of the Silhouettes. From the start, it is clear that he doesn't like Richie. He intentionally prevents Richie from singing at a garage party and mistreats his bandmates, leading to him being voted out. The next trope is irony. Cruel irony at that. When it came to who got on the plane, Valens and his group did a coin toss as to who would get on or be forced to take the bus, as the plane had limited seats. Valens won and mentions how it was the first time he ever won a coin toss. As he got seated and was clearly nervous, he was reassured, I believe by Buddy Holly, played by Marshall Crenshaw, everything would be fine as the sky belongs to the stars. And he just smiles. It's the last time we see him. Another trope further down the list is intrafamilial class conflict. Because Richie's career takes off, and it creates resentment with Bob. Mood whiplash. The movie begins with a group of kids playing basketball in slow motion and a blue filtered screen accompanied by the tune Sleepwalk. During this scene, we see a couple of planes fly over them. We focus on a kid tying his shoes, and suddenly the planes collide with each other in midair. Then we cut to Richie waking up, revealing it to be a dream or a bad memory. Oh, crap is another trope. Bob, when he hears on the radio that Richie's plane crashed with no survivors, runs to his mother to break the news personally before she finds out through the radio. Sadly, he's too late and makes it a time to see her frozen in shock just after hearing the news. Outliving one's offspring, the ultimate fear of adults. No, not Richie, not my Richie. Parental favoritism. Bob believes Connie is guilty of this towards Richie. Parting words, regret averted, albeit just barely. Richie and Bob reconciled over the phone before he got on the plane. Primal fear, a subject of the film, is Valens' fear of flying. It stems from the fact that an airplane crash in a neighborhood playground where Richie lived hurt several of his friends and killed one when he was young. Rite of passage name change, although it is generally a black mark on early film and music industries that they Americanized ethnic names. Keane treats Richie like someone who won't mind at all. The last one on the list, I'm going to go back one to get to the last one I want to talk about. Title drop, near the end of the film, Richie sings the titular song he was famous for. It is also the first song to play during the credits. Now, the big one, Say My Name / Skyward Scream. The last line comes from Bob in the film, who goes to a bridge contemplating Richie's death after his funeral. He breaks down and screams Richie's name in grief. The movie ends with a slow-motion flashback of an earlier scene of him and Richie running up a hill, one of their few good times together. And that's not one of their few good times together. They had a lot of good times together. They grew up together, didn't they? Yeah, I don't like the way that's written. That doesn't seem accurate. All right, what do you say we go back to Richie Valens' story as chronicled by Ryan Sheeler in his book. Picking up where we left off, right where things are about to get good. Because his music career was taking off so quickly, in the fall of 1958, Richie was soon finding that he did not have time for school. So he had to leave Pacoima High. He was soon playing some very good gigs at larger venues such as Pacific Ocean Park in Santa Monica and El Monte Legion Stadium. In October, Keane and Richie went on a concert tour of the East Coast where, despite his reticence, Richie had to travel by air on some of the dates. On October 6th, he would appear for the first of two times on Dick Clark's American Bandstand. On that performance, he sang Come On, Let's Go. For his next hit, Valens would release a song written about his girlfriend back in Pacoima. Richie first met Donna Ludwig at an Igniters party. The Igniters were a car club. Groups of kids were into cars and often street racing. Donna and Richie were from different neighborhoods, literally and figuratively, and had to see each other somewhat secretly because Donna's father forbade them to officially date. Hispanic and non-Hispanics didn't date in those days. So Richie had begun to write a song for his girl Donna with the beginning lines, I had a girl and Donna was her name. He pitched the song idea to Bob Keane, and in an afternoon session, Richie, Rob, and Herb Monte fleshed out the song. Herb was Keane's publishing partner, Chemo Music. Keane recorded a vocal and guitar demo with Richie at his home studio. It took it to Gold Star for overdubs a week later, with the addition of musicians Palmer, Hall, Kay, and others, with some nice lead fills by Richie. Donna was destined to be a smash hit. But it needed a B-side, and so Keane and Valens came up with an idea for an arrangement for La Bamba. The decision to include it would prove to be very fortuitous. By October 1958, Donna was starting to make a big impact on the charts thanks to another jumpstart from Chuck Blory, Weed, and Quinlan, Quinlin, at KFWB. Keane and Valens embarked on another tour that took them through Chicago and other cities. This was a 10-city tour. During this span, Donna would invariably be the number one chart topper and request in every city they passed through. By late November, the single would be back-ordered by about 100,000 copies at Delphi. And then the DJ started flipping the single over again, and La Bamba started to take off. Richie Valens had himself a true double-sided smash hit. In November 1958 through early December, Keane and Valens finished recording tracks for Richie's first full-length album, which would be released in 1959 as Richie Valens. In addition to the hits Come On, Let's Go, Donna, and La Bamba, there were other great songs like My Head, In a Turkish Town, Bluebirds Over the Mountain, and High Tone. After Richie's death, the leftover tracks from these sessions were augmented by tracks from Keane's home studio for the Richie album. Richie took a brief vacation to Hawaii, where he played the Show of Stars with Buddy Holly, Paul Anka, and others. Returning home to California on December 10th, 1958, Richie played gigs at San Fernando High and Pacoima Junior High. The Pacoima Junior High show featured Richie on guitar and vocals with Don Phillips on drums. Richie's friend Gail Smith emceed the assembly. She would go on to lead Richie's fan club. In a rather fortuitous turn of events, the school principal recorded the Pacoima gig, which was later compiled by Keane and released as Richie Valens live at Pacoima Junior High in December of 1960. For Richie fans, this recording is a truly cherished favorite of Richie's recorded output. Here in a completely live and unpolished setting, the raw talent of Richie shows through without any aid of studio technology. It is an authentic and entertaining musical document to which to listen, and Richie's guitar riffs are on full display. The album is more difficult to find these days. The more recent Richie Valens' The Lost Tapes is also a treasure trove of great Richie moments. Near the end of December 1958, Richie embarked on another East Coast tour. Somewhere during this time, he had picked up a sunburst Fender Stratocaster and his famous blue satin stage outfit. Blue satin shirt stage outfit. Excuse me, not to imply he was wearing all blue satin. During this stretch, he performed the famous Alan Freed Christmas Jubilee Show series in New York with Eddie Cochran, Jackie Wilson, and a host of other rock greats. This gig was remembered for the 1987 La Bamba film. And on this run, Richie made his second appearance on American Bandstand singing Donna, Donna / La Bamba was making a major climb on the national charts by now. In early January 1959, Ritchie recorded a few more sessions with Keane. He also appeared on NBC's The Music Shop and filmed a cameo appearance in Alan Freed's film Go, Johnny, Go. In his scene of the film, Ritchie is introduced to Freed by Chuck Berry. Ritchie then grabs a Gretsch guitar and sings Ooh My Head to a group of girls sitting at a table. Covered, as some of you know, back in the Chuck Berry episode of A History of Rock and Roll and Film and Rock and Roll. Go, Johnny, Go is definitely worth a watch. If you haven't seen it and you're into 50s rock, go search it out online. It's pretty easy to find. After filming wrapped up for Go, Johnny, Go, Keane signed Ritchie up with General Artists Corporation. GAC then booked Ritchie to be a part of the upcoming Winter Dance Party, a tour headlined by Buddy Holly and a new group of crickets with Waylon Jennings, Tommy Allsup, and Carl Brunch in place of Nicky Sullivan, Joe B. Maudlin, and Jerry Allison. Holly was working mostly out of New York at the time and somewhat estranged from the crickets and his manager, Norman Petty, who he felt was holding his earnings. Also on the tour were J.P. Richardson, the Big Bopper, Dion and the Belmonts, and Frankie Sardo. Ritchie did some more sessions on January 21st, 1959, and at a going-away party at his mother's house. After years of living in impoverished conditions with some money advanced by Keane, Ritchie was able earlier to buy his mother a new house. Then Ritchie flew out to Chicago to join the Winter Dance Party. Much has been written about the Winter Dance Party tour of 1959. Here is a brief summary. The tour itinerary was a major piece of poor planning. The gigs were scheduled in the ballroom circuit of the upper Midwest, with venues in Wisconsin, Minnesota, Iowa, and North Dakota among the locations. In January? February? Good Lord. The tour planners picked some of the very worst routes between the cities. The performers traveled by converted school buses. To cap it off, the tour occurred during the very harsh winter of early 1959. The heater on the bus broke down often, as did the bus itself, causing the performers to be stranded out in the cold. Often they pulled into venues very late, with only hours to spare before they had to perform. The teenage crowd would sometimes arrive at the venues before the performers would arrive on their crippled bus. A couple of weeks into the tour, conditions were unbearable. The performers were sleep-deprived, cold, and unable to get their clothes washed in a timely fashion. They pulled into the Surf Ballroom in Clear Lake, Iowa, on the evening of February 2nd, 1959, barely ahead of the concert start time. Sometime throughout the evening, Buddy had learned of Dwyer Flighting Service out of Mason City and chartered a plane for himself. Waylon and Tommy, drummer Carl Bunch, was laid up in hospital in Green Bay, Wisconsin, where he'd gotten frostbitten feet. The Big Bopper, tired and sick with a cold or flu, talked Waylon Jennings out of his seat on the flight. Ritchie also wanted to fly and asked Tommy Allsup to trade his seats several times in the evening. Allsup eventually relented, flipping a coin and losing his seat to Valens. A bit after midnight, the three performers and venue manager Carol Anderson left the Surf for Mason City, Iowa Airport, a short distance away. There, owner Jerry Dwyer and pilot Roger Peterson readied the Beechcraft Bonanza aircraft. The plane took off after midnight, in the early morning of February 3rd, bound for the next stop of the tour at Fargo, North Dakota / Moorhead, Minnesota. The plane never made it to the destination. It crashed approximately 5 miles north of Clear Lake in an open field, killing Holly, Valens, Richardson, and pilot Roger Peterson. It was the first great tragedy of the rock and roll era. Ritchie's family and Bob Keane were devastated by Ritchie's death. Eventually, his songs dropped off the charts. However, the Richie Valens album was released on Delphi in March 1959. God, a month after? Yeesh. Ritchie was released in October 1959, and Richie Valens, live at Pacoima Junior High, was released in December 1960. At the time of his death, Richie Valens was only 17 years old, and his career lasted a total of 8 months. Oh. He was buried at San Fernando Mission Cemetery in San Fernando, California. In 1987, director Luis Valdez, along with producer Taylor Hackford, released the film La Bamba, with Lou Diamond Phillips in the title role, Isai Morales as Bob, Danielle von Zernick as Donna, and Rosanna De Soto as Connie Concepcion Valenzuela, Ritchie's mother. Several of Ritchie's family members appear in cameos in the film. The band Los Lobos from East Los Angeles faithfully covered all of Ritchie's songs for the soundtrack, and their version of La Bamba hit number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100 chart in 1987. In addition, Bob Keane maintained Ritchie's image and catalog with some reissues and new compilations. Of course, Ritchie's original catalog and reissues all had a resurgence in the years after the film. Thanks in large part due to the efforts of Ritchie's surviving family, Bob Keane, and close friends, the continued success of the 1987 film as well, the music, influence, and legacy of Richie Valens remain strong today. Now, that is all I will read from the Richie Valens, His Guitars and Music by Ryan Sheeler for this episode. But I highly recommend it for anyone who is deeply, deeply curious about some very technical details of Richie Valens' career, because that is just the first chapter. It goes on to break down in great detail with photographic evidence all of his guitars, amplifiers, and even the history of the music store he and his family got the instruments at. I mean, this section on his Fender Stratocaster is a full 2 pages. I mean, down to like bullet points of the pickup switching on the 5-position Strat switch, the string gauge. He played 10 through 46s evidently. The kind of case it came with, the D-shaped neck profile, and then, I mean, there's pictures of like Donna sitting on a bed with his guitars after he died. There's, the specs on his amps. I mean, they're readily available in books, about the history of Fender amplifiers and guitars, but, reprinted here, in great detail. Let's see. And then it gets into the transcription notes for La Bamba, including the original version from Richie Valens in 1959, and then a separate section for just the guitar solo from the 1987 version by Los Lobos. Good stuff. And I will now read his epilogue to the book. It's about 4 short paragraphs. When Richie Valens died in 1959, along with Buddy Holly, J.B. Richardson, and Roger Peterson, rock music suffered the first tragedy of the golden age of rock and roll. It was a major event at the time, and its magnitude has only grown in subsequent decades. While Buddy Holly was the most established star on the tour, Richie Valens was the hottest and fastest rising. Richie's entire career was barely 8 months long, and he was only 17 when he died. His entire studio output recorded output barely filled 2 albums. But that music went on to inspire many the world over. Unquestionably, the 1987 film La Bamba did a lot to keep both Richie in the spotlight and bring new fans to his sound. Los Lobos' versions of Richie's songs did an admirable job of being faithful to his sound while bringing it to the present for a whole new generation of fans. As I mentioned in the introduction, I am one of those fans, for I am the next generation that came after that era. It was my parents who turned me on to their music, which included Richie and many others. As I was taking my first guitar lessons, those songs left a lasting impression on my young ears, being a shy and creatively minded child trying to find my way. And I think that was what Richie was doing. He had the talent and just so happened to be in the right place at the right time. Richie's story is the rags to riches American dream, but to stop there seems somehow unfair. Of all the guitarists, or great guitarists of early rock, Chuck Berry, Bo Diddley, Carl Perkins, Scotty Moore, Cliff Gallup, Eddie Cochran, Buddy Holly, Tommy Allsup, Dwayne Eddy, Link Ray, and others. That's a pretty great definitive list to start with if you're not familiar with some of those names, folks. Richie typically isn't mentioned. By all accounts, though, many who came to know Richie spoke to how good of a guitarist he really was. My hope is that this book shares some of that about Richie, the kind of guitarist he was, and how much he loved the instrument. His music features a lot of great riffs, solos, and phrases. As mentioned previously, some of these were played by Renee Hall, but Richie did perform nearly all of his own solos and riffs. Throughout the book, I've tried to capture some of the facets of Richie's style and bring them to bear on Richie's legacy. I hope you've enjoyed this journey with me down musical memory lane as we pay tribute to one of the founders of Chicano rock and roll, one of the all-time greats, Richie Valens.
Rock and roll music and why I preach against it, and I believe with all of my heart that it is a contributing factor to our juvenile delinquency of today.
At a hearty welcome to our drive-in theater. We have a wonderful evening's entertainment lined up for you, one that will provide several hours of pleasurable relaxation and diversion for you and your family. Did you fail to dress up for tonight's show? No tie, an old shirt and slacks, a house dress? Well, don't give it a thought. We're glad you came as you are. We just want you to enjoy yourselves.
All right, let's do some movie talk about the actual movie. I compiled a list of notes that I took while watching the film again, and this time watching it with commentary. First thing that was noteworthy at the beginning of the film, Lou Diamond Phillips had said he ate so many apricots during the week of filming in the orchard scenes that he got the runs. Then Bob's character shows up and is introduced riding a motorcycle to Bo Diddley's Who Do You Love? And Luis Valdez points out that, this is not the original Who Do You Love? This is a re-recording that they had Bo Diddley come out to L.A. to record specifically for the film soundtrack. And people who were in the know and that were fans of Bo Diddley just showed up that day to watch it go down and watch the recording, including one Mr. David Lynch. For the bikers out there, the motorcycle in question is a 1968 Harley Sportster that's been doctored up to look like a 1947 Indian. I noted to myself, the big brother, little brother dynamic is mwah, when they're like play boxing at the top of the hill. Later on in the movie, when they're like bunking together because Bob can't sleep at home and he starts like poking at Richie and making boner comments. Luis Valdez says that the Valenzuela, family was very protective of the life rights to Richie. They held on to those for a long time until they were satisfied that his production, was going to create a portrayal of him and their family that they could approve of. Lou points out that he had never even held a guitar before this movie, and he took 4 lessons a day on some days to get up to speed on it from a guy named Jim Fox. So thank you, Jim, if you're still out there somewhere. The creation of this sort of love triangle early on between, because Bob has moved in on one of Richie's old flames, Rosie, that was made up for the film. That was inspired by Luis Valdez's own experience. He wanted to use that as a way to create more interpersonal drama, more of a tense dynamic, but within the family, and that was approved by family members. They said that was okay. As far as the role of Donna, there were other blonde actresses that have a similar facial sort of structure, I think, that tried out. Among them, Helen Hunt and Laura Dern. Lou, apparently, there was a kissing scene that they had to audition with Lou, and he got to kiss. So he got to kiss Laura Dern and Helen Hunt. Good for him. Lou says he still has this green harmony guitar that he carries in the movie to this day. And it's not even like it's locked away. He states that it's just sitting right next to his desk that he sits at all the time. The scene where he sings and plays his audition with the Silhouettes was the take where Richie's aunt officially decided, like, you're going to be Richie. I will sign off on this. A music note from me. The song playing in the room while Bob and his friends are making Rosie uncomfortable, smoking a joint and getting obnoxious right before things get really scary. That tune is Don't You Just Know It by Huey Piano Smith and the Clowns, which is such a great rock and roll tune. I was first hipped to that as an adult by another Richie, Guy Ritchie, because he plays it on the outro credits for the movie Snatch, and I bought that soundtrack right away, and that is a great soundtrack full of awesome music. Crank up Don't You Just Know It by Huey Piano Smith. Next time you need to boogie. Down low boogie, right? And you need to get down in it. And can't let this opportunity go by. If you're a long-time listener, you know I have a tendency to do this. Go off on tangents about books where I was reminded of a thing about the stuff that we were talking about that a book has nothing to do with the topic at hand. Chapter 35 of Stephen King's The Stand starts with, he was cracking up, baby, don't you just know it? That was a line from Huey Piano Smith, now that he thought about it.
Went way back. A blast from the past. Huey Piano Smith. Remember how that one went? Oh, gooba, 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 ha, 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 etc. The wit, wisdom, and social commentary of Huey Piano Smith. Years later, Johnny Rivers had recorded one of Huey's songs, Rockin' Pneumonia and the Boogie Woogie Flu. Very appropriate to the situation. Good old Johnny Rivers. Good old Huey Piano Smith. Fuck it, Larry Underwood croaked. He looked terrible. A pale, frail phantom stumbling up a New England highway. Huey Smith was before my time. Give me the 60s. Sure, the 60s, those are the days. Mid-60s, late 60s, flower power, getting clean for Gene. Andy Warhol with his pink-rimmed glasses and his fucking Brillo boxes. Velvet Underground, the return of the creature from Yorba Linda. Norman Spinrad, Norman Mailer, Norman Thomas, Norman Rockwell, and good old Norman Bates of the Bates Motel. Dylan broke his neck. Barry Maguire croaked the eve of destruction. Diana Ross raised the consciousness of every white kid in America. All those wonderful groups. Larry thought dazedly, give me the 60s and cram 1980 up your ass. Cream, Rascals, Spoonful, Airplane with Grace Slick on vocals, Norman Mailer on lead guitar, and good old Norman Bates on drums. Beatles, Who, Dead. He fell over and hit his head. Now, every scene that features Richie talking to Donna the first few times, as soon as the conversation is over and they walk away, he jumps or runs, and it is so endearing. That just made me smile, made me happy. It's like, it's so great. It just takes you back to your teenage days of being all sprung over somebody in your high school. There's a note from about the singing and the guitar playing. Lou claims he met Jackson Browne once, who said he thought that was Lou Diamond Phillips singing in the film, and that Brian Setzer was convinced that Lou was playing on the guitar tracks, and that made him feel really good. Further along in the movie, there's a scene where Richie's mom, Connie, gets the owner of a bar to put him on stage with Bob so they can sing Oh Boy by Buddy Holly, which is a nice little, it's like a shit kicker bar, even though it's California, full of cowboy boots and cowboy hats and white guys. And so Richie decides, here's a song out of Lubbock, Texas, because he's like, well, if there's anything I can play, they might not hate me for, hopefully, Buddy Holly, a Texas guy, will, go over well. That's a great scene. And Esai Morales, who plays Bob, was quick to point out that, the drums you're hearing were recorded by the drummer from Los Lobos to be intentionally bad. So that's not my fault. I'm not playing those drums. But he's playing along to, he's playing exactly like a person who can barely play drums would play. It's fantastic. It's exactly how I play drums. Just banging along, hitting the cymbal and the snare at the same time, all the time. Just bang, 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 bang. Not like, I mean, that sounds a bit Metallica-ish there. But, you're supposed to keep time in different sort of ways with different limbs on the drums, and Bob's not there yet. It's very well portrayed. That's another thing, the realism here as far as the music portrayal, the performing, it's probably the highest I've seen, close to Backbeat, which still has the crown, as far as I'm concerned, for best portrayal of what a band would actually be like on stage, playing live in a believable way. Most other movies would have Bob or whoever's playing drums just like being very, I don't know, they don't tend to show them being awkward in an accurate way. And there's this. So the point was that before I got off track there, praising Esai Morales and the guys from Los Lobos, during the filming of that scene that day, Robert Duvall was visiting the set, sitting right behind the camera when Lou Diamond Phillips walked in and freaked the hell out. Every performance scene, Lou Diamond Phillips had, Luis give him direction on the acting first, and then the guitar teacher would come up to him and coach him on the hand performance. And then the vocal coach would come up to him and coach him on the physical performance of his face, basically, so it would match up. So by that third, little bit of tutoring and then time to call action, he's, his head's swimming with all the things he needs to do at once. Luis Valdez says that the silhouettes in real life were as integrated ethnically as portrayed. And I noticed that's reflected in their audience as well, in the scene where they play the American Legion dance It's very cool to see a historical rock and roll movie with more than just a bunch of white faces, in the crowd for a period like that. Because that's usually what you see. And even, because usually that's period accurate, depending on the artist we're talking about. But I loved seeing the variety of different kinds of faces out there. These people all partying together to rock and roll. It's great stuff. And having said that, when I look at the notes that I have from the Richie Valens scrapbook on the website that the family has put up and maintained, the chunk about the silhouettes has some very small, low-resolution black and white photos, just a couple of the band. And it says, by the time he entered San Fernando High School, he was playing guitar at school assemblies and after-school parties. In his junior year, he joined the Silhouettes, a band named after a song by The Rays, the only rock and roll band in the area, which I don't think the movie gets across very well, but there's only so much time, all right? The Silhouettes quickly became the local stars. At a January 1959 rent party held in an American Legion Hall, the band was taped by a part-time talent scout working for Bob Keane, the owner of Keane Records. Take two. After hearing the tape, Keane decided he wanted to hear more. Use take two. So, he wasn't at the show like he's portrayed in the film. Understandably, we got to compress the timeline. That's fine. Not a problem there. But the photo I see of the full band, the Silhouettes, I can count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 band members, all in black suits with skinny black ties and white collared shirts. Tough to see the details of the band members as far as, what their ethnicity is, but they all look pretty non-white. I could say that for sure. So yeah, the movie portrays them as having fewer members, but it looks like the makeup of that is pretty consistent. As far as skin color goes, of the band members in the Silhouettes at that time. During that scene, Bob shows up with his biker friends and they start some trouble. There's a great shot of Joe Pantoliano standing, up against a sort of like a glass case or something like that, or over by the bar, what would be a bar, even though this is like an all ages kind of a thing and they're only serving Cokes. There's a wooden chair comes flying, like he does the reaction and ducks out of the way. And then the chair hits the glass and smashes it. Lots of great impact, lots of great energy there. And it's a simple trick. It's just lock down the camera, film him dodging it, stop, fire the camera back up again, throw the chair at the spot where he was standing. Also, some cool notes about there's only a couple of spots in the movie where you see Richie smoking a cigarette, and it's not, it's nothing to sort of, it doesn't take you out of the situation or anything. It's not the focus of any particular conversation, but they did have a little bit of a dilemma behind the scenes about, do we show him smoking or holding a beer? Is that okay? Or do we want to downplay that? Do we want to eliminate that? And they chose not to misrepresent what a 50s teenager would be doing at the time in favor of just like a sweeter, more innocent portrayal. I think they felt they already had. I'm assuming they felt they already had plenty of like Richie's the innocent one, get it? Content in this film already. They certainly do for my taste. Another reason this movie kind of hit me hard when I was a kid, I wanted to be a cartoonist, and Bob wants to be a cartoonist, and also wanted to be a guitar player, and Richie wanted to be a guitar player and singer. And there's a lot of depth to Bob's character that you don't get in supporting characters for other films. And it turns out the scene where he saves a bunch of animation cells from work as a garbage man in Hollywood, that did happen, but it wasn't Woody Woodpecker, it was Disney cells. And obviously there's going to be a price difference there when you're trying to get permission to put that in your movie, if not a legal issue, a difference in the legality of doing that. So they went with the Walter Lantz variety of cartoons to put in instead. When we have the recording scene in Bob Keane's home studio or studio of some kind, Bob Keane was a bit annoyed about that portrayal and about that scene because, for one, his studio was supposedly a little nicer than what's being portrayed in the film, and Bob Keane was not bald, and this was the first movie where Joey Pantoliano decided to go in without wearing his hairpiece. He decided he made a decision to go bald for the first time in a role on this one. Just Bob Keane's luck. If you're young, I cannot overstate how much the attitude in America towards bald men changed in the 1980s and 1990s. You can thank three major players there: Michael Jordan, Patrick Stewart, and Stone Cold Steve Austin. Because bald guys were not cool before then. Calling someone bald was an insult, especially in like cartoons and stuff, Ninja Turtles or whatever, calling somebody Chrome Dome because they like the bad characters or weaselly characters in cartoons would like have their wigs snatched off or their hats taken away, and they would panic and go, and put their hands over their heads and run, crying out of a room. It was terrible. It was a terrible time for bald men. They were made to be very insecure about this totally normal, natural thing that happens to a large percentage of the male population, unfortunately. Let's talk about one of Richie's very important first trips outside of his hometown to play his music for new people. This is, again, from the Richie Valens Facebook page. And it says, on September 27, 1958, Richie made his first television appearance. It was in San Francisco on the KPIX Dance Party, an American bandstand-style program that had Bay Area teenagers dancing to hits of the day with contests and interviews with the host and guests. When Richie appeared, the host was Ted Randall. In 1959, Randall would be replaced by singer and actor Dick Stewart, who would make Dance Party the Bay Area's top-rated daytime program through 1963. I wonder if any surviving tapes of that have been uploaded to YouTube or archive.org. I'll have to check. Bob Keane drove Richie up to San Francisco for the KPIX appearance, along with his wife, Elsa, and their newborn son, Robert Jr. Richie would also make a radio appearance with DJ Jumpin' George Oxford's program on KSAN. His trip to San Francisco was noteworthy for a few reasons. It was his first appearance outside of Los Angeles. He'd also have trips that fall to Oregon and Washington. Hey, good stuff. We got to see him up here. And his first time on television. More importantly, the 10-plus hours sitting in the back of Keane's Thunderbird, strumming his white Gibson ES-175 acoustic guitar, planted the seed for his next recording. For almost the entire ride, Richie was picking the melody of a Mexican wedding song called La Bamba. It caught Keane's ear.
Don't forget to visit our refreshment center during the intermission or any time. You love the tasty array of snacks we have to offer. So will the youngsters. Everything is quality and so good. We hope you'll make this a weekly visit. Bring the family. Bring your friends. There are always wonderful new pictures to see, delightful snacks to nibble, a gay, pleasant evening for all. Oh, a word of caution. Don't drive over 10 miles an hour in the theater area for your safety's sake. And Mom or Pop, go with the kids when they leave the car. We hope you have a wonderful time. Come back soon.
Let us talk about director Luis Valdez in some detail now. I am convinced he may be the wisest film director I have investigated so far for a history of rock and roll and film and rock and roll. And I don't mean that to say that he is wiser as a film director necessarily. I'm just saying as a human being, he seems to possess and convey a lot of life wisdom that I don't hear from other directors, even the ones I admire more than any others as just directors in their craft and how they conduct their business and how they instruct actors on how to convey, human emotion in their films. I just think Valdez has too much life in him and too much about life that he appreciates and refuses to take for granted. And there's too much about humanity that he understands from the life he's lived to simply stick within the Hollywood system and only create via the rules of the Hollywood system. Now, if the Hollywood system had given him more chances to do that and more budget to do that at various times, I'm sure he would have more films that we would know. But I'll end my speculation there as far as his career goes. I've got more thoughts I've already recorded for the end of the episode about him and about the overall takeaways I have. As far as the specifics of his career, though, as filmmaker and playwright and play director and other things, I don't think the average person will have seen a lot of his films. Certainly, the Cisco Kid and La Bamba are among the most notable standouts that would be familiar to people that grew up, that were aware of his, about what was going on in Hollywood in the 80s, let's just say. Okay. Actually, Cisco Kid is 1994. I, for some reason, thought it was a lot earlier. There is a great interview I've referenced multiple times in this La Bamba series with Luis Valdez and one of my favorite directors of all time, Robert Rodriguez, and they talk about the impact that Zoot from 1981, starring Edward James Olmos, had upon the young, budding, soon-to-be someday director Robert Rodriguez, who would bring us El Mariachi and Desperado and Once Upon a Time in Mexico, as well as the Spy Kids franchise and the Sin City movies. So, of course, I paid attention when that conversation was going on, and I was enraptured by that conversation. There's also a movie from 91 called La Pistorela, and that evidently is a reimagining of the Shepherd's Tale, the wise men, going to apparently find find the baby Jesus. I guess it's a musical retelling of the Shepherd's Journey to Bethlehem. Yep, and it's available on YouTube right now if you want to take a look at it. It's about an hour and 18 minutes from 91, and it features none other than the talents of, can you tell I'm I'm stalling for time here because I don't remember them off the top of my head. Freaking Linda Ronstadt, Cheech Marin, of course, who works with Luis Valdez more than once in his career. Freddie Fender, Paul Rodriguez, holy smokes, and plenty of other Latin actors, and that I don't know as well. But I might have to check this out. But I'm really, really intrigued, mostly by what it's going to take for me to get my hands on a copy of Zoot. There's a really nice re-release of it that looks like could be a big freaking deal. I might have to put up some cash for here. I do want to read a little Amazon review of Pistolera. La Pastorella, sorry. I admit I clicked on the title because I thought it had something to do with a gunfighter. Not Pastolera. We all know the countless tellings of the Nativity and the birth of Jesus that have been done for the film and Bible throughout time immemorial. Well, that's not time immemorial, but okay, I know you're exaggerating, but like it's literally the post-Bible. That's not immemorial. Including some history and big budget, the Bible, the greatest story ever told. Most of them have been done from a fairly Anglo-centric point of view. Then in 91, writer-director Luis Valdez of Zoot and La Bamba fame, in league with the El Teatro Campesino of the San Juan Bautista in Central California, brought to the forefront via PBS TV the Hispanic depiction La Pastorela, known as, sounded Italian that, La Pastorela, known as the Shepherd's Tale. It's a young Mexican-American girl, Carla Montana, plays her. She was in the film Stand and Deliver in 88. Dismayed by her family's excessive want of Christmas gifts and such, while watching a performance of The Shepherd's Tale, is knocked out by a freak accident. And in the dream she has, she and a group of Mexican peasants are led to the manger in Bethlehem by the Archangel San Miguel, played by Linda Ronstadt. Along the way, they are confronted by minions from the underworld, including a devil played by comedian Paul Rodriguez. And in the final sequence, Linda must take on the fallen angel Lucifer, portrayed with savage dash by Robert Beltran. Given that Hispanic tellings of nativity are not easy to come by in a popular and still largely Anglo culture, it would be easy to call La Pastorela a masterpiece and be done with it. Due to certain limitations imposed on it, I can't quite go that far. Some of the humor is a bit forced, especially that Indian guru played by Cheech Marin. Some of the acting is a bit stiff as well, and the latter holds true for Linda, who is, by her own admission, not much of an actress. The special effects, especially Linda's aerial fight with Beltran, are also marginal, owing to the thin budget Valdez had to work with. Now, if we go back quite a ways in Valdez's career, there's a film in 1969 called I Am Joaquin, which he based on a poem of the same name. It's a very long poem. I encourage you to look it up, check it out, start reading it, see if it's the kind of thing that you might enjoy or learn from. I certainly did. By Rodolfo Corky Gonzalez. I'll read a couple of short excerpts. It starts as, Yo soy Joaquin, perdido en un mundo de confusión. I am Joaquin, lost in a world of confusion. I did not translate that. That's printed out. Caught up in the whirl of a gringo society, confused by the rules, scorned by attitudes, suppressed by manipulation, and destroyed by modern society. My fathers have lost the economic battle and won the struggle of cultural survival. And now I must choose between the paradox of victory of the spirit despite physical hunger, or to exist in the grasp of American social neurosis, sterilization of the soul, and a full stomach. Yet, yes, I have come a long way to nowhere, unwillingly dragged by that monstrous technical industrial giant called progress and Anglo success. I look at myself, I watch my brothers, I shed tears of sorrow, I sow seeds of hate. I withdraw to the safety within this circle of life, my own people. Then there follows like a series of declarations of I am, and then the name of a famous, native leader from South America or Mexico throughout history, and then transitioning into modern personifications of political leaders, various names for different kinds of cultural figures that would be sort of relatable. And yeah, further towards the end, you get some really, I enjoy the language and I enjoy the imagery. I am in the eyes of woman sheltered beneath her shawl of black, deep and sorrowful eyes that bear the pain of sons long buried or dying. Dead on the battlefield or on the barbed wire of social strife, her rosary she prays and fingers endlessly like the family working down a row of beats to turn around and work and work. There is no end. Her eyes a mirror of all the warmth and all the love for me, and I am her and she is me. We face life together in sorrow, anger, joy, faith, and wishful thoughts. I shed the tears of anguish as I see my children disappear behind the shroud of mediocrity, never to look back to remember me. I am Joaquin. I must fight and win this struggle for my sons, and they must know from me who I am. Part of the blood that runs deep in me could not be vanquished by the Moors. I defeated them after 500 years, and I have endured. Part of the blood that is mine has labored endlessly 400 years under the heel of lustful Europeans. I am still here. Carries on. Towards the end, there's a statement. I am Aztec prince and Christian Christ. I shall endure. I will endure. As I said, please go check it out for yourself. But I can see why a young filmmaker would be very moved by something like that. Just as he was moved by some legal, how shall we say, some legal fuckery revolving around Pauchocos and Zoot riots in the 40s that would directly inspire the film Zoot that I mentioned earlier.
This is me providing a break because I'd assume that no one wants to hear me talk for too many extended, unbroken periods of time without some noise cutting in. So I'm doing that now. Oh. Foot switching going on. So let's talk for a sec about the Zoot Suit riots. Yes, that is a reference made by the mid-90s third wave American ska. Sorry, third wave ska band from America. Cherry Poppin' Daddies from the song Zoot Suit Riot was a minor hit in the mid-90s when I was a young man, many, many thousands of years ago. And it does sort of depict, not really depict, but it's, it doesn't portray, it just talks about the, angry sailors on leave picking a fight with people wearing zoot suits. And I recall being told by another young person that the source of the resentment was because during wartime, obviously in America and plenty of other places, you're supposed to be conserving materials and literally material to make sure that the boys have uniforms when they're fighting or that the ships have sails, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And other kinds of supplies. So people walking around wearing big, huge, baggy suits were seen as folks that were thumbing their nose at the war effort, right? There was a big push as far as advertising, war propaganda, and general sort of the community attitude of we need to conserve everything we can. Don't drive your car more than you need to. Don't, if you're not carpooling, you're not doing your part to save gas, and that could be better utilized, in the war effort. And that same goes for sugar, for coffee, for cotton, all kinds of stuff. Rubber for tires, leather, whatever. Metal, scrap metal that people would have recycled. I'll go just basic Wikipedia here because I think it's a specialized enough topic that's a good, we don't need to read a book about this. But Zoot Suit riots were a series of riots that took place from June 3 through 8 in 1943 in Los Angeles, involving American servicemen stationed in Southern California and young Latino and Mexican-American city residents. It was one of the dozen wartime industrial cities that suffered race-related riots in the summer of 43, along with Mobile, Alabama, Beaumont, Texas, Detroit, Michigan, and New York City. American servicemen and white Angelenos attacked and stripped children, teenagers, and youths who wore zoot suits, ostensibly because they considered the outfits, which were made from large amounts of fabric, to be unpatriotic during World War II. Rationing of fabrics and certain foods was required at the time for the war effort, while most of the violence was directed toward Mexican-American youth. African-American and Filipino-American youths who were wearing zoot suits were also attacked. This was related to fears and hostilities aroused by the coverage of the Sleepy Lagoon murder trial, following the killing of a young Latino man in what was then an unincorporated commercial area near Los Angeles. The riot appeared to trigger similar attacks that year against Latinos in Chicago, San Diego, Oakland, Evansville, Philadelphia, and New York City. Now, as far as the Sleepy Lagoon murder case, this was something that made national news in 1942 and 43. There were 9 teenage members of the 38th Street Gang accused of murdering a civilian man named Jose Diaz in an abandoned quarry pit. All 9 defendants were convicted at trial and sentenced to long prison terms. There's a quote from Eduardo Obregon Pagan. It says, many Angelenos saw the death of Jose Diaz as a tragedy that resulted from a larger pattern of lawlessness and rebellion among Mexican-American youths, discerned through their self-conscious fashioning of difference, and increasingly called for stronger measures to crack down on juvenile delinquency. Convictions of the 9 young men were ultimately overturned, but the case generated much animosity within the U.S. towards Mexican Americans. The police and press characterized all Mexican youths as pachuco hoodlums and baby gangsters. So it doesn't matter what the outcome is. It doesn't matter that you get exonerated. Doesn't matter that you were the one that was maligned and treated unfairly and unjustly. It's whatever the public hears first, and the perception of danger and lawlessness and the instilled fear in the public, that goes along with images of young people of certain races dressed in a style that lots of folks find, if not offensive, unnerving or unsettling, right? Because the image of a pachuco is one of counterculture. It is a defiant act by someone who refuses to assimilate into Anglo-American culture of the time, high and tight with the old crew cut and buttoned-up colored shirts and, suit jackets and slacks and that kind of thing that are very tight and narrow and slim or whatever, compared to the baggy Zoot suits and big hats, long wallet chains, very almost extravagant looking. Like the extravagance, it's funny. In America, there seems like there's this constant reimagining fashion-wise of the extravagant version for poor people versus rich people. If you are dressed the way folks on Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C. dress, and you're older and you're rich, you look normal or like the establishment. But if you take those same suits and you change the colors to be something more bold and daring, and you change the cut of the collars and you change the cut of the waist of the pants, and you put a shinier belt buckle on, in different eras of American fashion, it's like a vulgar thing that only someone, who's from a crappy part of town would do. In I think it's almost more offensive than someone who dresses closer to their economic standing, someone who just wears much more flat, boring, utilitarian clothing, right? Something that says, I'm poor and I don't deserve to be seen is not offensive. You could be a janitor or a bus driver or someone, useful to society, as opposed to someone who's stepping out on your day off and you're wearing one of your two, favorite suits that's going to get you noticed when you go out to a nightclub, and, not the kind of thing that many much more degenerate men in high-rise buildings or our nation's, government buildings wear, that costs a lot more money but is reined in when it comes to the dimensions and doesn't attract too much attention unless you're rich enough to notice how expensive that boring-looking tie is, or that boring-ass fucking suit is with the same colors and the same cuts as a million boring-ass suits that came before it.
Oh, the play was a real personal statement in a way. I wanted to deal with the Pachuco and who the Pachuco had been. I'm old enough to remember the Pachucos in the 1940s. I had a cousin who was a full-fledged Pachuco as a teenager, and he had a running partner whose name was Cici, and they used to hang in Delano, California, in the valley. And my cousin, unfortunately, died of violent Pachuco's death in 1955, 17 knife wounds to the chest. Cici survived. So when I was going back to join the United Farm Workers struggle, I told my mom I'm going to Delano. And she says, oh, you're going to go work with Cici. And I said, Cici, is that vato still around? And she says, mijo, don't you know who Cici is? He's Cesar Chavez.
Oh, wow.
So Cesar was a Pachuco, and my cousin Billy was a Pachuco, and I was a little 6-year-old
You had a
kid.
connection with him back
To
then.
me, they seemed like, giants. So when I wrote El Pachuco as a character in the play, I was referring back to that childhood vision, right?
Right.
To me, they look like heroes. The Pachuco was part of my personal experience, and I had to use my imagination in order to make it public, to make it epic.
Okay, now at this point, it would be relevant for me to reference some sort of historical, cultural resource about the legacy of the Zoot suit and the title of Pachuco, and but I won't, because I've been distracted away from that type of academic pursuit, a legitimate exploration into the history, because I just happened to be reading a book by James Ellroy called The Black Dahlia that featured, at the beginning of the story, mention of such things. And because that just seemed to, strangely enough, dovetail in the timeline with me learning about Luis Valdez's personal history and career and cultural. Look, it's a cool bit of fiction, historical fiction, and I want to read it because of the fundamental interconnectedness of all things, which is always on display when it comes to me researching material for a history of rock and roll in film and rock and roll. So in honor of the late, great Douglas Adams and his books about Dirk Gently that emphasize the fundamental interconnectedness of all things, I will now read from James Ellroy's Black Dahlia. Now, for setup and background, your narrator here is a police officer with the LAPD and a boxer. And he says it was early June of 43. The week before, sailors had brawled with Zoot suit-wearing Mexicans at the Lick Pier in Venice. Rumor had it that one of the gobs lost an eye. Skirmishing broke out inland. Navy personnel from the Chavez Ravine Naval Base versus Pachucos in Alpine and Palo Verde. Word hit the papers that the Zooters were packing Nazi regalia along with their switchblades, and hundreds of in-uniform soldiers, sailors, and Marines descended on downtown L.A. armed with 2x4s and baseball bats. An equal number of Pachucos were supposed to be forming by the Brew 102 brewery in Boyle Heights, supplied with similar weaponry. Every Central Division patrolman was called into duty, then issued a World War I tin hat and an oversized billy club, known as something I won't say on this podcast right now. You can read the book if you'd like to know, or if you can do the cultural, historical, racist math about the LAPD, you can probably figure out what the two-word description is. At dusk, we were driven to the battleground in personnel carriers borrowed from the Army and given one order, restore order. Our service revolvers had been taken from us at the station. The brass did not want 38s falling into the hands of replete, stuff cuff, drape shape, Argentine ducktail Mexican gangsters. When I jumped out of the carrier at Evergreen and Wabash holding only a 3-pound stick with a friction-taped handle, I got 10 times as frightened as I had ever been in the ring. And not because chaos was coming down from all sides. I was terrified because the good guys really were the bad guys. Or the good guys were really the bad guys. Want to read that right. Sailors were kicking in windows all along Evergreen. Marines in dress blues were systematically smashing streetlights, giving themselves more and more darkness to work in. Eschewing inter-service rivalry, soldiers and jarheads overturned cars parked in front of a bodega, while Navy youths in skivvies and white bell-bottoms truncheoned the shit out of an outnumbered bunch of Zooters on the sidewalk next door. At the periphery of the action, I could see knots of my fellow officers hobnobbing with Shore Patrol goons and MPs. I don't know how long I stood there, numbed, wondering what to do. Finally, I looked down Wabash towards First Street, saw small houses, trees, and no Pachucos, cops, or blood-hungry GIs. Before I knew what I was doing, I ran there full speed. I would have kept running until I dropped, but a high-pitched laugh issuing from a front porch stopped me dead. I walked toward the sound. A high-pitched voice called out, "You're the second young copper to take a powder from the commotion. I don't blame you. Kinda hard to tell who to put the cuffs on, ain't it?" I stood on the porch and looked at the old man. He said, "Radio says cab drivers been making runs to the USO up and down Hollywood, then bringing the sailor boys down here. KFI called it a naval assault. Been playing anchors away every hour on the half hour. I saw some gyrenes down the street." I don't know if that's gyrenes or gyrenes. I've never read that word in my life. "You think this is what you call an amphibious attack?" "I don't know what it is, but I'm going back. You ain't the only one who turned tail, you know. Another big fella came running this way pronto." Pops was starting to look like the wily version of my father. "There's some Pauchocos who need their order restored." "Think it's that simple, laddie?" "I'll make it simple." The old man cackled with delight. I stepped off the porch and headed back to duty, tapping the knocker. There's half the equation for you. Against my leg. The streetlights were now all dead, and it was impossible to distinguish Zooters from GIs. Knowing that gave me an easy way out of my dilemma, and I got ready to charge. Then I heard "Bleichert" behind me, and I knew who the other runner had been. I ran back. There was Lee Blanchard. The Southland's good but not great white hope, facing down 3 Marines in dress blues and a Pauchoco in a full drape Zoot suit. He had them cornered in the center walkway of a ratty bungalow court and was holding them off with parries from his knocker. The jarheads were taking roundhouse swipes at him with their 2x4s, missing as Blanchard moved sideways and back and forth on the balls of his feet. The Pauchoco fondled the religious medals around his neck, looking bewildered. "Bleichert, code 3. I waded in, jabbing with my stick, the weapon hitting shiny brass buttons and campaign ribbons. I caught clumsy truncheon blows on my arms and shoulders and pressed forward so the Marines would be denied swinging room. It was like being in a clinch with an octopus and no referee or 3-minute bell. And on instinct, I dropped my baton, lowered my head, and started winging body punches, making contact with soft gabardine midsections. Then I heard, "Bleichert, step back." I did. And there was Lee Blanchard, the knocker held high above his head. The Marines dazed, froze. The club descended once, twice, 3 times, clean shots to the shoulders. When the trio was reduced to a dress blue rubble heap, clumsy of me there, Blanchard said, "To the halls of Tripoli, shitbirds," and turned to the Pauchoco. "Hola, Tomas." I shook my head and stretched. My arms and back ached. My right knuckles throbbed. Blanchard was cuffing the Zooter, and all I could think to say was, "What was that all about?" Blanchard smiled. "Forgive my bad manners. Officer Bucky Bleichert, may I present Senor Tomas dos Santos, the subject of an all-points fugitive warrant for manslaughter committed during the commission of a Class B felony. Tomas snatched a purse off a hairbag on 6th and Alvarado. She keeled of a heart attack and croaked. Tomas dropped the purse, ran like hell, left a big, fat, juicy set of prints on the purse, eyeball witnesses to boot." Blanchard nudged the man. "Habla inglés, Tomas?" Dos Santos shook his head no. Blanchard shook his head sadly. "He's dead meat. Manslaughter 2's a gas chamber jolt for Mexican-Americans." There's another term in the text for that. Hepcat here's about 6 weeks away from the big adios. I heard shots coming from the direction of Evergreen and Wabash. Standing on my toes, I saw flames shooting out of a row of broken windows, crackling into blue and white flak when they hit streetcar wires and phone lines. I looked down at the Marines. One of them gave me the finger. I said, "I hope those guys didn't get your badge number." "Fuck them sideways if they did." I pointed to a clump of palm trees igniting into fireballs. "We'll never get them booked tonight. You ran down here to roust them? You thought—" Blanchard silenced me with a playful jab that stopped just short of my badge. "I ran down here because I knew there wasn't a goddamn thing I could do about restoring order. And if I just stood around, I might have gotten killed. Sound familiar?" I laughed. "Yeah. Then I saw the shitbirds chasing Hepcat, who looked suspiciously like the subject of a felony warrant number 411-43. They cornered me here, and I saw you walking back looking to get hurt, so I thought I'd let you get hurt for a reason. Sound reasonable?" It worked. 2 of the Marines had managed to get to their feet and were helping one another up. When they started for the sidewalk 3 abreast, Tomas dos Santos sent a hard right foot at the biggest of the 3 asses. The fat PFC it belonged to turned to face his attacker. I stepped forward, surrendering their East LA campaign. The three hobbled out to the street, gunshots and flaming palm trees. Blanchard ruffled Dos Santos' hair. You cute little shit. You're a dead man. Come on, Bleichert. Let's find a place to sit this thing out. And that's the end of the relevant section. Just something that I think does a nice job of displaying what would be the attitude towards that particular subculture at the time, especially from an authority figure, police officers, and the fact that white American servicemen probably felt pretty well empowered to take out their suspicion and anger over an incident that may or may not have been reported accurately on that community, and the propagation of rumor that they're Nazi sympathizers helps justify the mob mentality pretty nicely, doesn't it? I'm being facetious, of course. It does not justify it, but in the minds of a mob, that's all it takes. So it seems to me. Now, before the movie Zoot Suit, he directed a play, which did very well, I guess. Got some attention and might have won some awards or got him some acclaim enough to get, funding for a movie in 1981, I believe it was. As we mentioned, it's about the Zoot Suit riots of 1943. World War II tensions, hysteria about the war, but also how that went hand in hand in the timeline with big band jitterbug sounds. He talked about, how wild it was to see big suits on the men but short skirts on the ladies at the time. Very transgressive. Bonnaroo, as they say. I don't know what that means. All I know is it's a very expensive music festival that I've never been to. One of many in the last 20 years. It's come along. But one of those cases, the Sleepy Lagoon case we talked about earlier, 12 young men were sentenced to San Quentin, 4 of them for 20 years. And as he says, the collective being, the social being, reacts slower than an individual. So there are wounds 70 years later in a community from events that happened a long time ago. Now, before the Zoot Suit play, he was experienced in a few different sort of, I guess, live performance art forms, or not different kinds of like plays or stage acting, specifically some that were a little more geared towards spontaneity and in public places. And these skills were what he utilized in Teatro Campesino, which was an activist organization that was also a drama organization. And he was very active in, workers' rights struggles and a couple of different, sort of very impactful, let's just say, worker strikes for people picking grapes and stuff, among other things. And they would not only do these shows where they like trained workers to take part in them or play music in them or act in them or help out. They not only did these to educate members of the public that could be reached, with these performances about the struggle of the workers, but also to, let's say, take the edge off the, maybe more aggressive or angry tension the workers could be likely to convey to people who were in authority trying to shut them down or restrict them from this kind of expression. I'll let the audio from Luis speak for itself once again.
The music became an essential part of what we were doing anyway. The corridos, the ballads that dealt with the movement, and we used to sing these at the meeting. And we discovered that music on the picket line was one of the ways that you could dispel fear. if you are really confronting violence, and then we had some real cases. I had a gun put to my head at one time out on the picket line. Your sphincter puckers, you know, you can whistle Dixie, you know, real quick. But the thing is that if you're singing, it kind of dispels that and also breaks the tension. It does something different. So I respect music for all of its power, but I respect it on the stage too, because I think it's like water. It really helps to solve a lot of problems.
Returning to my notes about La Bamba, observations from watching it and revisiting it and listening to the commentary, I personally had a weird moment, a little bit conflicted with this sort of celebratory scene where, you know, Richie's mother, you know, cries out, "You're going to be signed to Delphi Records. You're going to, you know, you're going to be in your contract," I think is the exact words, with Delphi announcement from Connie. It was always in my memory as one of those typical, like, "You're going to make it" showbiz story moments as a youth. But Delphi was not Capitol Records or CBS or RCA Victor. It was an indie label. It still got Richie airplay and national fame. I mean, Bob Keane obviously, you know, was not a weak little neighborhood concern. He did a lot with the effort that he put in and the technology he had and his ability to use it, for sure. And he deserves all the credit in the world for that, and recognizing Richie's talent as well. But as an adult, I think this is a missed opportunity to emphasize how special a time it was in rock and roll history that this small operation, one like Bob Keane's, could pull that off. I want to know that. I want to know more about that. Obviously, I understand that, you know, the running time for a film needs to be cut at some point, and that's not as relevant to the general wider audience. I still want to know more about that story, though. So I don't know. Well, hopefully, I'll be able to do further research on that. If you listen to the Patreon episodes, been going systematically through Ed Ward's history of rock and roll and the state of the industry and the state of the recording and the radio and the promotion of rock and roll. Sort of all those different areas of the industry is fascinating to me. It just sort of moves with technology, and it moves with American economics, and it moves with, well, it tends to then move American social perceptions by force, one way or another, in the fullness of a little more time as it goes on. But the recording industry it's a rocky history during this time. Very, very, very cool to learn more about. But as far as, I haven't gotten quite as far as this period of the 50s yet in that narrative. So we'll see how Ed Ward sort of sets up the scene for the indies that are still, or that are popping up, I guess, not still going at you know, towards the latter half of the decade. The phrase "come on, let's go" or "come on" appears a lot in the script because that was the original title of the movie. Bob and Luis Valdez have had conversations during the making of the film, the writing of the film, about how many teenagers had to go down south to lose their virginity in those days. Speaking of the Tijuana scene, let's see. Bob made a lot of trips to Tijuana back then. Richie did get a tattoo similar to the one portrayed, a little bit different design, and that's what helped identify. Turns out, on a morbid note, it helps identify his body when he's found at the scene of the plane crash. Since he was found in the snow, his body turned blue. Let's see. I did a little bit on TV Tropes, and I had a quibble about one of their notes about La Bamba, the song. Or no, I didn't have I didn't have a quibble. It was that they had a quibble about how he learns how to play it in Tijuana while there's a band on stage. The band on stage is, of course, Los Lobos, but they point out, like, he's known this tune and he's played it with his family and stuff up to this point. But it's a weird gray area because he clearly recognizes it in the narrative of the story. So the TV Tropes article sort of represents it as Richie never was familiar with the song until he goes to this whorehouse with his brother. But it's a little more nuanced. He's like, hey, La Bamba. And he goes over and he starts watching the guy playing guitar and copying the chords. That was a cool moment, I think, for guitar players to watch. It's a fun realization of yourself. It's a fun recognition of yeah, I've had to be that guy. But the way Richie's portrayed is so earnest, like no airs at all about it being sort of silly for this young kid to run up to a guy playing on stage in a brothel and just smiling and like looking at the guy's hands while he plays the guitar and like copying directly what he's doing. Yeah, he's so excited. Man, just the consistency of the portrayal of Richie all the way through this as someone so upbeat and energetic and earnest, who is, not perfect, not without he's not like a shining knight in armor, it's so great. I don't know. I'm so glad I've returned to this film. as you do when you get older, with films that you've not watched that had an impact on you as a youth, but you haven't watched since you got really into films. There's so many rewards now to be enjoyed and observed in the details. But the overall point was like, I think the implied point that I took away from that note in the commentary about Bob and Luis talking about, the role that a prostitute plays in a young man's life in that area and in that culture, I think might have something to do with the effect of Catholicism and shame on a community, that whether it's polite American society in general, or specifically maybe, Chicano society in an area that's so close to Mexico, where you're expected to be, a clean and neat American citizen in one way, and also abide by the sort of pressures of church life. So you don't get to have sex in a more, exploratory, natural, in your own environment kind of way. You need to be sneaky about it. I'm reminded of the stories I heard in the late 1990s of college students at Brigham Young University in Salt Lake City, Utah, taking weekend getaways to Las Vegas to marry someone they wanted to have sex with, having sex for a day and a half, and then having the marriage annulled, and then going back to school Monday morning with no one else the wiser. Another note I wrote down for myself during this portion of the show: God damn, this movie is good. There's so much more variety and culture in this story than the usual young stardom tales I remember. And I was thinking that during the sort of recovery scene where Richie wakes up after going out for the night with Bob, and Bob hooking up with some prostitutes, and Richie being a good boy, but still getting loaded and getting a tattoo, waking up in a tent, and confronted with this wild old man waving a rattlesnake at him as he skins it. And that's as a kid, I remember that being a very striking image, and you just don't see that in other rags to riches, famous person stories. It's very, very cool. I like this. I like the I don't know, this transformative bit, let's say. I like this hero's journey kind of thing, the talking to the old man, I like this indication of something a little higher, more spiritually aware or provocative or confrontational to Richie, who's been living this nice life up to this point and making the best of everything that he can. And even when life is hard, it was still nice, supportive family. And now he's under the influence of Bob's choices, Bob's world, a world he should probably recognize his own connection to. And more to that point, we're now going to talk about the feathered serpent. This is something that Luis Valdez brings up in interviews, specifically I think it was the one with Robert Rodriguez that I watched. And he brings it up in the commentary as well, because at this point we are confronted with the old man who skins a rattlesnake in front of Richie very forcefully, the way you got to do it, I assume, and provides him with a totem, a necklace that features rattlesnake rattles and feathers. Valdez says that Richie is the feathers, Bob is the serpent, the grounding element that he needs. Richie's the one that flies. The magic twins is what they are, according to Valdez. And this is his talisman for the rest of the movie, rest of his life. This is, an outward expression of this concept for Richie, which I'll just be direct and go to Wikipedia for the sake of your time. Because I feel like exploring further than that is just going to be very, very long-winded and in detail, more than is necessary for this rock and roll story. But it is a prominent spiritual entity or deity found in many Mesoamerican religions, still called Quetzalcoatl among the Aztecs, Culiacan among the Yucatec Maya, and Cuucumats and Tohil among the Quiche Maya. So apologies to anyone who knows how badly I mispronounced those. I don't know that there's a lot of you, so I fear very little reprisal. The double symbolism used by the feathered serpent is considered to be allegoric to the dual nature of the deity, where being feathered represents its divine nature or ability to fly, to reach the skies, and being a serpent represents its human nature or ability to creep on the ground among other animals of the earth, a dualism very common in Mesoamerican deities. Earliest representations of feathered serpents appear in Olmec culture, 1400 to 400 BC. This predates the Maya and the Aztec. This cultural enclave extended from the Gulf of Mexico to Nicaragua. Most surviving representations of the Olmec art and a painting, such as Monument 19 at La Venta and a painting in the Juxtlahuaca cave, Huxtlahuaca, I'm going to guess, cave, show the feathered serpent as a crested rattlesnake, sometimes with feathers covering the body and legs, and often close to humans. It is believed that Olmec supernatural entities, such as the feathered serpent, were the forerunners of many later Mesoamerican deities, although experts disagree on the feathered serpent's religious importance to Olmec. H.B. Nicholson notes that as early as the Middle Formative Preclassic in the Olmec tradition, images of serpents with avian characteristics were often represented in several types of artifacts and monuments. This composite creature, who has been denominated the avian serpent or Olmec god 7, appears to constitute an earlier form of the later full-fledged feathered serpent, the rattlesnake covered with feathers, probably with at least some of the same celestial and fertility connotations. And then the article goes on to sort of only detail a couple of paragraphs worth of continued recognition of the imagery found in artifacts noted by Spanish conquistadors, and how it's sort of carried on and on and on and on and on throughout the centuries. So it's worth digging deeper into, I think, if that kind of thing is up your alley. I'm encouraged to do so just by my own my own curiosity, and the way I was with the Robert Johnson episode for Crossroads and talking about Papa Legba. And I really want to make more time for that kind of stuff. I love learning about those. I'm not a fan of religion, but when it comes to cultures that have lots of different personifications and graven images of sort of characters that populate their culture and their spirituality, it's hard for me not to be really interested and want to learn more. Last time, we read a couple excerpts from the book Richie Valens, the First Latino Rocker by Beverly Mendime. And today, I definitely want to jump back into that because it was, for the longest time, the definitive biography until, well, I assume its place is going to be usurped by a new book called Come On, Let's Go, something, Richie Valens, et cetera, et cetera. I follow a Facebook page for Richie Valens that's been putting out a lot of excerpts in advance of its release, which should be right about now, probably available to buy. Strangely enough, now that I finally get around to putting out my Richie Valens episodes, someone puts out a new book, as they did with Chuck Berry as well. So just like with the Chuck Berry episode, I am relying upon a book published in the 80s, even though there's a new, probably more definitive book that just came out. I am really curious about the Chuck Berry book. I haven't read it yet, but I've got a million bookmarks in the autobiography to utilize for the next Chuck Berry episode. Anyhow, the writing from Beverly's, I mean, when it's from her perspective, I think is fantastic. When I get into her historical accounts about Richie and his career, I think there's just so little meat on the bone there for an artist that died so young, had such a short career, that she doesn't come across as the greatest writer because she's trying to make, she's trying to make a much larger soup out of a somewhat weak broth. if you get my drift, I mean, like, let's see, there's a section about the recordings and the songs. Come On, Let's Go. Come On, Let's Go, it says, is one of the earliest songs more or less everyone agreed Richie wrote himself, though the words changed. And by the way, there's discussion in this book about who wrote what possibly, and not all of them are definitive, as we'll get to with Donna. All right, if you heard that, that was my stomach. If you didn't, good for you. It's early. It's 6:45 on a Sunday morning, and I've had one cup of tea and no food yet. I'm feeling friskier than my voice would indicate, because it is so low and weak right now. But I just decided I was going to fire up the old recording machine and get on to the Richie Valens story before doing anything else today and going and eating. Let's see. But here's what Beverly, bless her, decided was, relevant details about the origin of Come On, Let's Go. The origin of the phrase, according to someone identified as Sandoval, maybe an associate of Richie's, maybe a member of the Silhouettes, maybe a school chum, I would assume. I haven't read this book cover to cover, but the origin came about when two black students at a Pacoima Junior High assembly went up to Richie and said, "Come on, let's go," from which he began the song. All right. Was that a story that needed to be told? I don't know. I'm not a published author. It says the phrase is consistently used among Richie's family, and its origin probably stems from Richie rather than anyone else. All right. I mean, that's not exactly definitive. That's not exactly that helpful. It's also, I mean, not the most. It's just a phrase people use a lot. I don't know that we need an origin story behind it unless it involves, like, someone had an accident and injured themselves, and then they said, "Come on, let's go," to the hospital. And then we forever associated "Come On, Let's Go" with other things that were, I don't know. Why I can't even make up an interesting story about the origin of a title like "Come On, Let's Go." It's like, yeah, he said, "Come on, let's go to the grocery store." And we knew we had a hit. Now, Now, what was interesting in this chapter about the stories behind the songs is, unlike a lot of other accounts of a certain artist's recording schedules, there are no definitive set of dates for the Delphi recording sessions. A majority of them probably occurred in the summer of 1958. And eventually, Come On, Let's Go first appears as the pick of the week in Billboard magazine on September 1st, 1958. Billboard described it as, Ritchie, a new artist, has an effective approach on the rocker. Supported by good rock and roll backing, he delivers the catchy tune, which he cleft himself in a saleable manner. It's a fine debut disc, and the lad appears to have a winner with this first attempt. Now, the B-side was Framed, a Lieber and Stoller cover that was recorded by the Robins, who eventually became the Coasters. And, of course, Lieber and Stoller, I mean, if you think of any Coaster song you know, they probably wrote it. And they worked very tightly with that group to great effect, I must say. It was, let's see, it's the only Valens song under the company Marna Publishing. I don't know if that's significant about anything in particular. Other songs came under Kemo Music, K-E-M-O, in which Bob Keane was directly involved. In which the author likes using a lot of these little 2-word, 3-word phrases to sort of pad things out. I hope Beverly Mendheim did a lot of other writing in a much more personal way. If I click on her name on the Internet Archive, that's the only thing that shows up, just this book. Now, another thing that's interesting that I see on the page. The highest, let's see, this DF4 106 single was ever reached was number 42 on the Billboard charts in October 1958. By November that year, it was covered by Tommy Steele. That's 2 months later. Top British pop artist at the time. The song was later recorded by the McCoys in 1966, and most recently by the new wave group, the Ramones, in conjunction with the movie Rock and Roll High School, and by Los Lobos. Well, yeah, and by Los Lobos for the soundtrack to La Bamba, which this book addresses later on. That's worth mentioning. Yeah, this new wave group called the Ramones that was in a movie called Rock and Roll High School. I can't find any record of them doing a Richie Valens cover. That was really interesting. I've read at least 4 books about the Ramones and more to come, and I've never heard anything about them doing "Come On, Let's Go." Would have been cool if they did. I would love to hear it. I think it would have been on the extended versions of Road to Ruin, probably, if they had that in the vault to include on disc 2 from when those came out. There's still questions, says the book, on whether Come On, Let's Go was recorded for final release in Keane's basement studio or at Gold Star Studios. Bill Jones remembered it taking place at Keane's home. I sat there for all 14 takes of it, said Jones. Keane had a really fine guitar player, and when it came time for the guitar break, Richie dropped out and the other guitar player took it. Also, some cool notes about the fact that Bob Keane had 2 saxophone players play on the track, one alto and one tenor, and a tenor and a baritone. And the way Keane mixed them, I guess you couldn't really tell that there were 2 of them because he was kind of meshed them together pretty seamlessly. All right, now I'm going to spoil some magic. It's controversy time about Donna, according to Beverly Mendheim, who writes that it is this simple little song written for a 16-year-old high school acquaintance that is most associated with Richie Valens, and yet within the simple framework of Donna lies a wide range of controversy and dispute, ranging from for whom the song was originally intended to who actually wrote the song. Even the relationship Richie may have had with Donna Ludwig Fox is in question. One friend who knew them both well stated, frankly, I know that Donna was just using Richie. She was kind of embarrassed to be seen with him. Most of Richie's acquaintances seem to agree that Donna and Richie were not very close. Another mutual friend, John Alcaraz, agreed, I knew the guy that Donna was dating. Donna was one of those real good-looking girls in school, the type that everybody wanted to go out with. And later on, she met Richie. Richie always wanted to go out with her, but I don't think he ever did. He liked her. That's why the song came out. I guess he just did the best thing he could do, write a song for her. Most of the Silhouettes felt that Richie and Donna were not that close. Prendes recalled, I used to see Donna at the hamburger drive-in in San Fernando, but I didn't know that Richie was involved with her until he started with the song. Aguilera added, he was real serious about Donna, but I don't know if Donna was serious about him. Aguilera and the other Silhouettes also knew about Donna's father's initial feelings about Richie because of his ethnic background, and he said, we know something about that, but we didn't want to get involved. That was his business. Donna herself admitted that she and Richie never really dated. She said, for some reason, my father didn't care too much for him, and I wasn't allowed to date him. I had to sneak out and meet him at parties and roller skating rinks. It got to be quite a hassle. So that's not even the whole thing, but it's tough to judge how much of a relationship they actually had if the only times they were really close with each other was in secret, right? So who's to say? Some observer saying they weren't close because I never saw them being close. Well, you don't know what was going on behind the scenes, do you? So it says, despite the difficulties which may or may not have been racially motivated, Donna did admit there was a very close relationship between her and Richie. It was all a very simple teenage type of thing, she said. We had a nice little relationship. Of course, we necked. And that was average, but we were never deeply sexually involved. She recalled the names of necking. By the way, young people, look it up, I guess. I don't know what to tell you. My impression of what the necking indicates is usually lots of making out and kissing up and down the neck and maybe chewing on the ears a bit. And holding each other. She didn't say heavy petting, so maybe it didn't go down the hands didn't go down the pants, I guess. Let's see. She recalled the names of some of the places that she and Richie and their friends used to hang out. And okay, who cares? In the interim, we had a falling out, and Richie was seeing a girl who's now my stepsister. But my girlfriend at the time, Kathy Brown. What? Okay, that's a sentence. I don't understand it. Donna's, because it's about Donna's recollection of how the song came together, or how it came into her life. In the interim, we had a little falling out, and Richie was seeing a girl who is now my stepsister. But my girlfriend at the time, Kathy Brown, period. All right, Beverly Mannheim, that's on you. I can't remember why we had the argument. However, one night Richie called me and sang a song. A few years after Richie's death, I was led to believe that someone else had written Richie's recording of Donna, but I can swear that I talked to him on the phone and he sang it with his guitar in the background. Let people say what they want. I know he wrote it for me. Mrs. Reyes also attested Richie was close to Donna. She stated Richie was at her home at the time the song was sung over the phone. Richie told me, look, Tia, I made this song and it's going to be for Donna. So he phoned her and started telling her about it. Then he actually sang the song for her over the phone. Mrs. Reyes also remembered that later on the road, Richie told her that he had a bet with members of the Crests, who had their first hit, 16 Candles, as to whose song was going to make it to number one first. Donna Fox also had another story to tell about the song. The song was recorded but hadn't been distributed yet. Richie was introducing Donna, and they had a big dance and converted the Rainbow Roller Rink into a dance hall. I wanted to look extra nice, so I bought a bright red outfit. Richie liked red on me with my blonde hair. As soon as he got through playing, he came down and put his arm around me, introducing me to all the band members and said, "This is my girl." Then Donna was released, and the first time I heard it, I bawled like a baby. It was quite touching. Too many people have laid claim to the origin of the song. Several have attributed that at most Richie had a minimal part in the writing of Donna. Perhaps the most surprising of these claims comes from a book by Richard Williams, Out of His Head, in which none other than Phil Spector has claimed to have had a hand in the production of Donna. Yeah, but he's a kook and a wacko and a murderer. I mean, he wasn't known to be a murderer when this book came out, but Spector attended Fairfax High School in Hollywood and was part of a group called the Teddy Bears, which had a hit, To Know Him Is to Love Him. A few months before Come On, Let's Go was released, it remained a hit after Donna was released. Therefore, the possibility of Spector and Valens meeting each other while performing the LA circuit is feasible. Yeah, but does that make it a rumor worth publishing? I guess if if you're doing a biography of a musical artist and it's only 153 pages long with the bibliography and all the references and everything you can cram into it, I guess that's worth printing. But nah. A lot of things are possible, but let's see. Does Mannheim actually give any indication? Like, where's the quote from Spector saying he wrote it, or is it just a rumor? There's an uncanny resemblance in rhythm and orchestration between the two songs, but the possibility of Spector, who at the time was barely organizing his own musical affairs, to have had even a small part in the making of Donna, other than Richie possibly listening to Know Him Is to Love Him, is highly improbable. Okay, then, all right. Bob Keane had this to say about Donna. He had only the very first line. I had a girl, Donna was her name, and that's all he ever had, with a couple of 4 or 8 bar riffs. I and my partner in publishing business wrote the rest of the song. I didn't take credit for Richie's songs, except for maybe 1 or 2. Keane mentioned he co-wrote many of Valens' songs under the pseudonym of R. Kuhn, Kuhn. In actuality, his real name. Keane also said that it was his voice that dubbed the harmonized part of not only Donna, but other songs as well. He said, I wanted to overdub Richie's voice at the beginning, but I couldn't get him to do it. He said, I can't do it. He wouldn't try. Maybe he was tired of doing too many takes, Bob. Maybe he was better and he just didn't think that your controlling ass needed to be entertained with a million retakes of the same lead vocal when that one that you had was good enough, and maybe he had somewhere to go. Because he's a teenager after all. Let's see. Hall said Richie did sing his own harmonies on the dubbing and emphasized Keane was not a singer or a guitarist. Keane went on to say that additional refinements were done to the basement recording. I used professional microphones and crossed the circuits to get the echo, and all I had there was Richie on his guitar. Then I took it in the studio and put on not Renee, but another guy playing rhythm guitar. Richie made the fills. There was a bass player, Clark, and a drummer, Palmer. The claim about who actually wrote Donna transcends Keane's possible role, because here we go now, getting even deeper. There is some dispute among members of the Silhouettes. Conrad Jones, the younger brother of Bill, wrote, Richie did not write Donna. I did. And for one person in the world, Richard Valenzuela, who was in love very much with a girl who didn't really love him. But his brother had a different story behind the song. The original guy who wrote Donna was Gilbert Royale, who is currently in East L.A. He wrote a song called Emma after Emma Franco, the Silhouette singer. And the only thing Richard did was drop Emma and put in Donna. He took it word for word the way Gilbert wrote it. There was no change in it, just name only. If anybody else was feeling blue and wanted to use the song, he would put his own girl's name in there. But originally it was written by Chico, nickname of Gilbert Royale. I wouldn't mind if that's the true story, quite frankly. That's what boys do. Other Silhouettes disagreed and claimed that Royale was not really a musician, but hung around them. So he's a drummer. Ha 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 ha. Sorry, old joke. Also, the song was originally called Mercy after Mercy Ortiz married Harfield, Armando Ortiz's sister, whom Conrad supposedly had a crush on. Ending a sentence with a preposition, Beverly. How to bring shame upon your family name. Upon whom Conrad supposedly had a crush. There, I've corrected it for you, Beverly. The song, which eventually became Donna, was apparently a joint effort, Aguilera said. They, Conrad and Bill, had written a song called Mercy. Richard used that and kind of made it into Donna. That is the truth, and I remember that much, but in my opinion, they all came up with it together. They all said, let's make it into Donna, and they did. Ortiz agreed that Conrad wrote most of the song as Mercy, and Richie changed it, but Gallardo believed that Richie wrote the whole thing. Prendez added, it was at the Jones house. We went there one night, and the song came to be. It was called Mercy because Conrad had a crush on her. But one night, Keane was at their house, and the song changed to Donna. Conrad gave Richie the words, and Richie started using Donna in Mercy's place. I might add that Takaki also had a crush on Mercy. So I would suppose that Richie Conrad and Walter Takaki all made the song possible as far as the words. The tune of the song, I would have to say, that was all Richie's. Interesting. Takaki also agreed with Prendez's story and added, "It was written one night. We all got together, and Keen was with us. We had just played at a dance. Richie played it at the Joneses' place with the rhythm and everything, and Keen said, 'Hey, that sounds good. Why don't we build up words around it?' So we all got together, and it was just a simple song called Mercy. That's where the words came from, and that's where Richie got them. As for Richie singing the song on the phone to Donna, well, that part is true, but never quite sang it the way it was in the original song."
Okay, let me get cranky for a bit. When researching this episode and checking out, magazine articles from the past, I came across an article on Pitchfork.com. Always, the always well-respected and well-thought-of Pitchfork.com from August 2020 by Matthew Ismael Ruiz. It is called The Pitch, Revisiting La Bamba, the Richie Valens biopic that underscores the myth of the American dream. In this ongoing series, we revisit some of our favorite music movies, from artist docs and concert films to biopics and fictional music flicks that are available to stream or rent. And I would probably do well to check out more of these Movie of the Week articles that they have here. I think that's the series. It's called Movie of the Week. Now, I said I'm going to be cranky. And I say that because I just groaned when I read the headline, and because it's a Pitchfork article. I'm like, oh, this is going to be, I don't know, combative or just, it's a necessary point of view. I'm glad people point these things out. Like, the American dream don't work out for most people. I get it. And, there's a lot of complexity, but also, I don't know. The premise, I don't agree with the premise that we've all been sold on the American dream being a real thing. But, it starts with the American dream can be cruel. I'm not going to read the article. I'm just a couple bits. The American dream can be cruel. Ricardo Esteban Valenzuela Reyes and his family got a taste of it, only for it to turn to ash in their mouths. Valenzuela's recording career as Richie Valens lasted just 8 months in late 1950s when he flirted with the top of the charts and the silver screen. On February 3rd, 1959, he died at 17 in a devastating and ironic plane crash that also claimed the lives of Buddy Holly and the Big Bopper. Director Luis Valdez's La Bamba tells the story of the Chicano teenager whose enduring hit crystallizes the second-generation American experience, a catchy tune that meets at the intersection of Mexican folk and early rock and roll, obliterating the imaginary border between the two. What I take exception to, just personally, this is my impression, this is my opinion, this is not me criticizing the writer. The implication that the American dream is what turned to ashes in their mouth because their sweet boy died in a plane crash. Like, the American dream didn't kill your son. The American, systemic racism didn't put your kid in a plane and murder him. if that's what you're trying to make me feel here. The implication that the family was screwed over by following the American dream or had the rug pulled out from under them because of their ambition for the American dream. Also, the imaginary border between Mexican folk and early rock and roll. I think you're speaking a little. No, this is where I am criticizing the writing. I think historically, I would go back to, rhythm and blues, African music, and jazz, and Louisiana piano players, more so than Mexican folk music, as having a stronger connection to early rock and roll. It's not that I want to discount obviously I don't want to discount the influences of Mexican folk music and rock and roll. That's the reason why I'm so sprung the Richie Valens stuff now that I'm revisiting it and going deeper into it, for this episode. It's a very different sound in subtle ways that most people probably don't catch unless they're into studying these influences, right? But it's just a really simplistic, like, blanket accusation that, we're also this implication that we're also unaware that Mexican folk actually is rock and roll. No, that's not the case. You can make as fucking Nick Toshi said, I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it again. God damn it. If you're a listener of the Patreon, you're about to get a double dose of Nick Toshi's introduction to Unsung Heroes of Rock and Roll. God damn it. I got super fired up the other day. And I tore into this old sermon, and it is a sermon for me. It is like, if you're a longtime listener to A History of Rock and Roll and Film and Rock and Roll, and or a subscriber to the YouTube channel, you may have heard this before, and I don't give a shit. Like, this is like how a pastor returns to the same Easter scripture every year. I return to this so often, and for myself, and I'm not going to hold back anymore when I feel the impulse to bust this out on episodes of the show, even because I already have before. Hey, you might not have heard that episode where I busted this out, and if you did, it's time for you to hear it again. I don't give a shit. This is like the John 3:16 of rock and roll here. Remind yourself of what it's all about. Rock and roll, writes Nick Toshis, was not created solely by blacks or by whites, and it certainly did not come into being all of a sudden. It evolved slowly, wrought by blacks and by whites, some of them old and some of them young, in the South and in the West and in the North and the East. Its makers were driven not so much by any pure creative spirit, but rather by the desire to make money. Nothing can better bring together a black man and a white, a young man and an old, a country man and a city man than a dollar placed between them. Rock and roll flourished because it sold. The more it sold, the more it flourished. The heroes, unsung and sung alike, of rock and roll had one thing in common. They liked Cadillacs. If rock and roll had not been sellable, they would not have been making it or trying to make it. Now, back to Pitchfork.com. Let's see. Oh yeah. It says it's a Valens biopic ostensibly, but its cultural legacy has extended beyond its individual sphere of influence. The singer's 1958 version of the Mexican folk song La Bamba was a minor hit upon release, but Los Lobos' cover for the film was a certified smash, going #1 in 10 countries and selling more than 2 million copies in the U.S. alone. The success of La Bamba helped sustain a wave of Latino films in the late 80s in Hollywood. Stand and Deliver, Born in East LA. I don't think that sounds like a wave. That does not sound like a sustained wave. That's one like dramatic, action-oriented sort of movie, a tense drama, and then that's a comedy with Cheech Marin in it, who had been making comedies for a decade or more at that point, right? Well, late 80s, so more like 2 decades. Yeah, it fizzled out, unfortunately, is what I'm saying, and that sucks. Proving the financial viability of movies about Latinos made by Latinos. No, it didn't. That's not what happened. Luis Valdez will tell you that. Ironically, it also served as a career springboard for its Filipino-American star, Lou Diamond Phillips. Valdez, understandably, caught heat for casting Phillips as a Chicano icon, but almost all other aspects of the film's presentation are marked by consideration and empathy. How is the casting of Lou Diamond Phillips not marked by consideration and empathy just because he's Filipino? The director himself says he saw 600 guys to play Richie. Then they started sending casting calls out to Texas, even, outside California. Lou came in to audition for the brother of Bob. Why didn't you cast a Latino? Or more surreptitiously, they said, these are Luis Valdez's quotes, why did you put a Filipino in there, man? And I knew we were going into a minefield of sorts, but listen, the play is the thing. I think he did a phenomenal job, and we considered trying to change his name. Could he be Luis Diamantes? Ha ha ha. For my part, personally, I noticed how much Hispanic talent is overflowing in this movie. The whole movie is full of Hispanic talent. All the white people in this are supporting characters or very small parts. The entire focus is on Richie and his family. Donna and Bob Keane are white people who are inserted into their world and need to reckon with it in the story. They are outsiders. They are sort of welcome interlopers, I guess, in a way, culturally. By comparison to this first experience, getting his way and making all these, making this movie with so many Latino actors, Luis Valdez talks about how he and his wife then tried to make a film about Frida, the Mexican artist, but because there were no Latina film stars at the time a studio could make money off of, this whole thing was rejected time and time again. He then made the Cisco Kid with Jimmy Smits and Cheech Marin in 1994, but that was about it for what he could do in Hollywood at the time with, predominantly Hispanic talent. This is, before white America decided there was, there was something to be, it's worth paying attention to Latina actresses like Jennifer Lopez and Selena and, Salma Hayek. And I don't know what her big breakout role was for before From Dusk Till Dawn or after From Dusk Till Dawn, but that's the one that sticks out for me. Gotta say, but I'm trash. I'm a dirtbag. I love that movie. There weren't bankable female stars of that ethnicity, I guess, as far as Hollywood was concerned. So no, there was not a sustained wave, as blatantly overstated by this Pitchfork article. I also want to take an issue with another bit here. While Isai Morales' performance is a bit over the top, by the film's conclusion, we're offered a glimpse of the inferiority complex that fuels Bob's self-sabotage. That said, his interactions with Rosie, Richie's crush from the migrant camp, goes beyond problematic into straight up abusive. Problematic. Yeah, it's real. It's abusive. People abuse people. Jesus Christ. Problematic. Because once a journalist says problematic, they tend not to mean problematic behavior because it creates problems for people. They mean problematic in how we should assess its portrayal by the creatives that are portraying it. It wasn't handled in a way that, they find justified. It shouldn't have been portrayed this way, is what they're always trying to tell you, right? He forcefully escalates a secret makeout session to intercourse, admitting to Richie that he almost had to rape her to have sex. That the behavior goes unaddressed in the film feels gross, regardless of the era in which it takes place. It was not unaddressed in the film, Mr. Pitchfork. It was addressed later by Elizabeth Pena's performance. She blatantly shouts out loud to family members while Bob is in the shot. He doesn't want a wife. He wants a love slave that he can push around. But it's a woman that, addresses it. So I guess you don't find that worth listening to, do you? No, that's not true. I don't believe that. I think Matthew Ismail Ruiz is far too culturally sensitive about things to blow off a woman's performance and to downplay her importance. He would want to be a champion. He would want to be a white knight. He would want to be an ally, no doubt. But he was too lazy to really listen to what and pay attention to what was happening in the fucking movie. Is my problem. If I was to be very uncharitable and very probably dishonest, I would try to accuse him of sexism, but I don't think that's the case. That would not be in character with someone that seems to have, very progressive views. Anyway, it's a fairly substantial article if you want to check it out for yourself on pitchfork.com. If you agree, if you disagree, whatever, it's if you're hungry for more stuff to read, there you go. But man, fuck that dude. It's just so lazy and judgmental, and it's so easy to be lazy and judgmental in this kind of entertainment journalism. But what a prick. Fuck you, dude. Those really get to me, those blanket assertions from people that don't live, eat, and breathe rock and roll about Oh, I'm so much more clever than you because I'm just going to shoot down this long held, truism about who invented rock and roll and tell you who really did it, even though I'm so late to the party and have, not really done a lot of research. I just found, this is a very bold statement I'm going to make because I'm so brave. It's like in the supplemental features of Cadillac Records, the movie about chess records, Beyonce, who I thought, was very entertaining, did, a killer job acting in that movie. As Etta James, for my part, I enjoyed it. I got no trash to talk. But I don't have a ton of insight into how Etta James moved and walked and talked in real life anyways to criticize her for. I know Etta James didn't like it, but Beyonce's like, she goes, Elvis isn't the king of rock and roll. Muddy Waters is. And I'm like, fuck you. Do you know how many black artists you could have named that would have been actually accurate? Chuck fucking Berry, Little fucking Richard. They're kings of rock and roll. Either one of them or both of them you can say is more of a king of rock and roll than Elvis, and I will support that statement, even though my opinion is different. I think they're more important to rock and roll in a lot of ways. But Muddy Waters' career was really damaged by rock and roll. He's not rock and roll. He's a blues man who made blues music, who was really underappreciated early in his career, and then like in this great correction of glory later in time, thanks to the Rolling Stones and other British acts, he was, lifted up out of this sort of obscurity that he was sort of falling into by comparison to the success he had with early singles. Even though he was successful with his early singles, I would still say he was underappreciated. He's one of my favorite artists of all fucking time. No, he wasn't the king of rock and roll. You don't just get to, you do just get to say that, obviously, but you don't just get to like replace one guy with another. For my part, I call Elvis the king of rock and roll because of the main guys, Elvis, Jerry Lee, Chuck Berry, Little Richard, of that time. He was the one that left rock and roll first. He quit rock and roll faster and moved on to gospel and like his Vegas stuff and his movie soundtrack stuff. And he was still more culturally important than any other artist. He did the least amount of rock and roll than those guys. And he was untouchable. I don't know. He was more of a success. He changed culture. He's the king. That's fine by me. I don't fucking care. Not my favorite. But if I can be even more over-explanatory about why I'm grossed out by the attitudes of people like this guy who write this way. It's not, when I said earlier, I'm not criticizing his writing. I'm trying to say, like, technically, I'm not saying he's poor at expressing himself or his attitudes and opinions. Not bad at all. Like, very good when it comes to summarizing various aspects of the film. Not a bad movie reviewer. It's not lazy writing. It's just the gall and the overinflated sense of authority to be telling us, instead of saying, it makes me uncomfortable that the character of Bob gets to behave this way without repercussions or something to that effect, right? I mean, Bob isn't a happy character. He's miserable a lot of the time. And he's not the hero of the piece. And it's also annoying to me that someone just comes along and says, well, it's, it should have been addressed differently. It should have been addressed to imply that, like, Richie Valens needs to be like a Captain America character and like stop injustice from happening, when this movie just depicts a lot of the uncomfortable aspects of life with relationships with different people, especially in your family. Sometimes people in your family are people that behave in ways that are reprehensible. And there's people that are sexually aggressive in the world. And that makes for difficult times for people that are in physical, sexual relationships with them. I don't think I'm breaking new ground here in explaining this. And the fact that this movie is not like a feel-good, oh, everyone gets what they deserve and everything's happy all the time, or, you know, all injustices are rectified or addressed in some way, as if you're going to like take your brother out of the family or something because of what he's doing to his wife. Like, the discomfort you feel when you see this happening is real and it's valid. That's what good art does in a lot of situations. You should feel unfulfilled, and you should feel put off, and you should feel disturbed by actions that are going mostly without any sort of punishment there. But you see the effect it has on the other characters, and you see how difficult of a position it puts everybody else in, you know, brother, mother, wife. It affects them all very negatively. And they don't get together, as in real life, they don't get together and unify and then put a stop to it. That's what's disturbing about it. Because it's real, you dick. I feel like this writer's the kind of person that would have stuck us. He would have been on the side of the people that created the Hays Code back in the early whatever it was, the early quarter of the 20th century, you know, making sure certain things didn't appear on screen and making sure the bad guys were always punished by the end of the story. Same kind of thing that they had in, you know, early television. Same kind of people that, you know, believe that somehow must believe that the Bechdel test would dictate that Resident Evil 2 is a much better film than Godfather 2 because it features women that are having conversations in it that don't involve them talking about man, which I think is a cool metric to measure certain kinds of movies with. But, you know, sorry, there's going to be stories about two men in a foxhole in World War II, and they go on for 3 hours in a movie, and there's no other characters, and so you don't get unless you shoehorn in a flashback of two women talking about something unrelated to the story. I don't know, whatever. I was made aware of the Bechdel test by a very staunch feminist friend of mine who had some smart things to say about it that I learned from. But then she's like, you know, they're going to make it the law in Sweden or something like that. Like, I don't think it needs to be. I don't think we need to make laws about this. Do we need to make laws about movies? What the second? I don't know. Big tangent. That was a big tangent. Thanks for sitting through it. But to refer back to my annoyance at the language used in the article, in the review, it's like, my annoyance is at the choice of the phrasing of, like, you know, it is, he uses an "it is" statement about how unnerving the effect is on presumably the entire audience, anyone that would watch this movie, as opposed to say, it made me feel this way and it made me question blank. It didn't make him look inward. It made him decide the movie was in the wrong for not addressing sexual power dynamics definitively for him. That's what's annoying as hell. That it's coming from a place of the article's coming from a place of its own authority when it uses that kind of phrasing. Anyway, I hope that all serves as a. I hope this whole section serves as some sort of a compelling emotional outburst backed up with conviction. God forbid. On my part, I don't know. I'm only speaking my mind and speaking my critical voice in a way that feels natural. So I certainly don't pretend to be right about these feelings, but I have them, and I express them with the thoughts associated. And here you are to be absorbance of it. My congratulations or condolences to you. Can't tell, my voice is in bad shape for different parts of this recording. Thanks for hanging in there. What? Nope. All right. Almost. Now, my final segment about notes I have from things I learned about La Bamba from the commentary.
Oh, fuck yeah. Oh, fuck yeah.
Hellfire! Hellfire! All right.
That's pretty good.
Sorry, I'm a bit flustered. I didn't get a good night's sleep last night because I didn't sleep upon my Radish mattress. I slept upon an inferior mattress made out of other types of vegetable matter, not of a radish origin. And that kind of sleep, I tell you, folks, is just for the birds. For the birds, I says. Let's see, where we left off with the Feathered Serpent and the Magic Twins. Lou Diamond Phillips notes that this film is the highest grossing rock bio and Latino-centric film of all time, apparently, up to the recording of that commentary, possibly still. Holy shit, Luis Valdez cast so many extras in this film. So many first-time actors, people with no career up to this point, no on-screen experience, no power in the industry, no pull, just so he could make sure that as many people as possible got a Screen Actors Guild membership card for the first time. That's so fantastic. And there are, if you watch it again, compare it to other rock biographies in film form, there are tons of family, there's tons of community members, there's children, there's elderly people that are just in there for certain scenes, but it all makes sense. It's all relevant because it is conveying like a local following and, people that went to the high school with Richie and family members. And, it's not like a lot of other films where it's just like the two main characters or the band and the main character lead singer. And you'll talk to, there'll be some promoters here and there, a manager, a radio DJ, and then maybe one, crowd scene that they probably chop up and milk for like 3 or 4 different events. But it's probably, a similar house shot from a couple different angles or, just sort of reused. Nope, not with La Bamba. Great stuff. Very, very cool. There are little bits of the conversation on the commentary that point out little actor tricks that Joey Pantoliano has up his sleeve when it comes to being the dominant or more noticeable actor in a scene. The part where he meets up with, he goes on the radio, and the guy that he's talking to, I think it's Rick Dees, is being portrayed, something like that. He handed the actor a piece of gum while he was, entering this. Basically, sits down in front of him, gives him a piece of gum. So this is what they're saying in the commentary. This is what Lou Diamond Phillips said. That the other actor's lines wouldn't be as strong because he's now chewing gum. He's going with the flow. He's like, he's kind of going with this little
this weird little improvised thing he thinks is happening that's going to make the scene cooler. Well, it's not improvised. It's calculated by Joey Pantoliano. So that when he's delivering his lines, he will be stronger and more dominant than the guy he's acting opposite. Other things they mentioned is when he didn't have lines, he would do things to pull focus away from the actor that did have lines, like start tying his shoes in that scene, you know, doing that like in the foreground, pull focus away from whoever the subject of that scene was actually supposed to be. When it comes to the acting in the later scenes of this film, I wrote, I do love all the encouragement from Eddie Cochran for Richie right before he goes on stage in Brooklyn after Jackie Wilson. Lou Diamond Phillips says the jacket he wears in the Brooklyn Alan Freed performance, that kind of iridescent snakeskin jacket, he eventually gave to George Thorogood because George loved Richie so much and thought that jacket was so cool. Of the ending, Luis Valdez says something very practical and still impactful, and that's not an easy balance to strike when it comes to human language, I think. He says, you don't want to end on a bummer. You want it to be cathartic, right? But there's a big difference there. He says, a cleansing thing rather than a depressing one. Perfecto. Fucking love it. The man has a plan. He has thoughts. He's not just a technical guy that doesn't understand people. He's not just a visual director that doesn't understand writing. He is the whole package, which is, I think, why he has had the career he has had. He has gone from Hollywood back into teaching, you know. I really admire that. There's a scene. Someone says, oh, they don't have food like this in New York. Yes, I could say New York City can boast a lot of things, but not Mexican cooking, boy. I forget. God damn it. I should have put more context in this note. I just wrote 7 and 7. He hands Richie. All respect to my granddads and people that bought me cheap Canadian drinks on the road when I was in a band. Yeah, my granddads, both sides of the family, were regular imbibers of some variety of Canadian whiskey and 7-Up. Let's see. I wrote a lot of Bob's bad behavior comes straight from Bob's stories in the film. He admits to all the fights and the nasty behavior portrayed in the film. The scene with Connie collapsing. Sorry. There was a scene that was being filmed and Connie was on the set and she collapsed into Lou Diamond Phillips' arms crying, "Why did you go? Why did you have to go?" Until someone came up to her and said, "We talked about this. You can't do this." Lou says when people tell him, "You made me cry," he's quick to point out that it's everyone else's reaction that makes them cry, not him. He didn't do anything. And he's right. The acting, the supporting characters and the way they're portrayed and the actors that react to Richie's death at the end is very compelling and heartbreaking. The story about how Donna found out about his death was real. She went to school and her friends had to tell her what happened. 6 months after the premiere, Connie died. She's buried next to Richie in the same plot in the same cemetery. If you want to look for the headstone of them side by side, you can search that image on Google or some other search engine that doesn't steal all your data. If you know of one, let me know what universe you live in. There's also stories from Isai Morales, people on the street just scream, "Richie!" at him. Diamond Phillips says people scream, "Not my Richie!" at him on the street because of the ending scene with his mother. As the movie ends, Lou says he's very proud. There's only one edit on the outro footage of him playing La Bamba. He kept it together. He didn't fuck it up any more than no one had to cover for him and chop it up any more than once. Luis Valdez talks about going to college parties in 1959 with his friend, and they were playing songs together to entertain people, and always dancing with girls to La Bamba. He also talks about La Bamba's, the song's origins from West Africa, and traveling from there to the east coast of Mexico in Veracruz. He mentions it might have been Bamba at the time. And he wants to point out how, like, African roots come to America sometimes through Mexican influences to Richie Valens. And on the subject of Richie and this film, this is such an exceptional film that I was so pleased to revisit because it's so different from other music bios. It's not about a tortured genius who doesn't relate to people. There's plenty of those, and those are all great stories. I love those stories too. But Richie's not misunderstood. Richie's not isolated. He's not tortured. He's not prone to outbursts and rage. He doesn't abuse people. You know, this is not Elvis. This is not Jerry Lee Lewis. This is not Sid Vicious. This is not, a lot of other. This is not Jim Morrison. This is not a lot of people that have been the subject of history of rock and roll and film and rock and roll episodes, and it's so refreshing to see a matter like this treated with an adult approach. Though, he's not a goofy kid. He's determined. He's hardworking. Things weren't just handed to him, but he never, there's conflict, there's oppression, there's struggle, but he's got youth and enthusiasm on his side and talent and dreams. That's what he cares about. It's explicitly stated. There's no, the symbolism comes from the outside. It comes from other factors, like Luis Valdez talks about. Richie's there to be a force. He's there to be a positive force in everything he does, which doesn't mean he's innocent entirely. He's not that he's prone to a little cynicism, not that he's prone to a little, some downbeat moments here and there, but overall, he drives forward because of his dreams. As should we all. And I think we think we do, but we need that kick in the ass, that positive one, not the negative, mean-spirited one, not the drill sergeant shouting at you, or whatever form that takes, not the the angry, cranky version of that, that's not inspiration. It's just barely maintenance. It's the mean-spirited voice to get you over whatever your current crisis is and out of bed. The voice that says, "Oh, don't be a bitch. Go do it. Go do it, even though you don't know why you're doing it." It'll last you. It'll last you through the morning. It won't carry you through life. You gotta reconnect continually with your source of inspiration and creativity and love and hope. What's yours? Hopefully there's more than one. It's community. It could be your instrument, could be your church, could be your mentor, could be your family, could be your friends. Hopefully it's a combination of a lot of different things so that when you're down and you don't feel the connection to one, you can lean on the connection to the other. But it has to be something you put back into. It's regenerative, right? You feed it often by feeding into the goodness around you to other people. So you don't become too isolated. You don't become too dependent upon a concept that you can't grasp. And you don't just get older and wonder, where did it go? Where did the inspiration go? Where did the Why was, you don't fall into the trap of just wondering, well, where did those good feelings go? There used to be all these this nice youthful inspiration and this energy. We were all out there to get things done and make it happen. And now those people are grown up and they're bitter or they're dead or they're busy. You look back on things and you realize, hopefully realize. I say you, I mean me. Let's get that clear. But I hope I mean you as well. You look back and you realize, oh, someone else put into that. Someone else pushed us young people together and made it possible for us to have a band or have a group of friends or a baseball team, or a singing group or a community of some kind. And we fed off each other's energy and inspiration and hope. You got to put back into that. And the nice thing is, it doesn't have to be convoluted. It doesn't have to be, you don't have to be right the first time. You just express energy. And it seems counterintuitive maybe to have to put out energy to get energy back into you. But really, the more I've experienced this, the more you normalize, the more you routinely engage in a practice of pushing out productive energy, doing things for other people if you don't know what to do with yourself, at the bare minimum, better life gets. And the more roads you see, the more pathways you see to doing good things that feed your soul. And the revisitation of La Bamba has been a nice reminder of, damn, dude, what a great, I don't use the words very often, what a great hero Richie Valens was. The way he could believe in himself and by all accounts still be practical and supportive of other people and be an original voice in rock and roll. I mean, how great is that? What's yours? What's your original voice? Is it in rock and roll? Is it in management? Is it in counseling? Is it in walking dogs? Is it in giving advice to people? I don't know. Is it in fixing cars? Is it in spray painting shit on the side of a building? Is it making the day a little bit brighter for the crew you're hanging with and doing a job with? That goes a long way. That makes a lot of people's lives better. Don't downplay that, right? Luis Valdez is a playwright, theater director, and an activist well into his 70s. And just like Lou Diamond Phillips, we can't judge his output by the Hollywood segment or portion of his career. He has creativity in all directions, and you got to believe he's fostered, that creativity in himself through working through other people, supporting them, and holding them up and giving them fuel. One of the quotes I came across from him that I love is, if you can relate to the river of humanity and the generations as they come and go, you're in a good place.
Please remember to replace the speaker on the post when you leave the theater.
Last episode, I read a short little write-up about Come On, Let's Go by Richie Valens from the liner notes book from the Rhino Records collection, Loud, Fast, and Out of Control, The Wild Sounds of 50s Rock. And I was revisiting some of there's like 3-4 really great essays at the beginning of this book that I think I'll probably use for the Patreon episodes that are coming up. If you want to hop on over to the Patreon stuff, we are deep into like 6 different timelines of rock and roll history on every episode. So for the entry on La Bamba, I think this is as nice a way to end things as we could hope for. For many years, Richie Valens was a prophet, a dead one, as prophets tend to be, with relatively few followers. Chan Romero, Eddie Quinteros, Sonny and the Sunglows, and Cannibal and the Headhunters were among the few Hispanic rock and roll stars to follow in his wake. Valens' La Bamba and the Champs Tequila brought Hispanic music into the broad church that was rock and roll. He transformed the traditional song, reputedly from Veracruz, Mexico, into something entirely new. The guitar solo was a learning tool for Jimmy Page, among many other an aspiring axeman. We all know the coda to this story. Donna / La Bamba were on the charts when Valens died in the plane crash that also took the lives of Buddy Holly and the Big Bopper. It was February in Iowa, and Valens had never imagined it could be so cold. The poor kid was probably trying to make one leg of the trip as short as possible by flying. And that'll do for my roundup of the Richie Valens saga and the La Bamba saga. I was very touched by a lot of things that I learned over the course of the research I did. I was also very moved by the music I revisited for this and explored more of when it comes to the Richie Valens catalog. It just plugged me back in, man. Plugged me right back into the source of my energy and my hope and my drive. Fired up my engine. Rock and roll, man. It's so good. Rock and roll is rock and roll, as Jerry Lee Lewis once said on camera. I hope you remember that you deserve to be loved. I hope you remember that you deserve to have a good time and pursue creative things that make you happy and help you grow. I appreciate that you give a damn about rock and roll and the making of films. I appreciate you being here for a podcast that is very out of whack, out of step, out of format with what makes a successful podcast. I sincerely do appreciate you justifying my existence by listening to it. I don't know what I would do if I didn't have an outlet for this love and this passion. And when it comes to researching these stories and these artists, I certainly wouldn't feel the same if I was just writing a book and then watching it not sell, which it most certainly would not, I'm sure. This is why I do a podcast instead. Because I like to talk instead. I like to put music in. You've probably listened to more of my original music just from this one episode than plenty of other people that I've performed in front of in clubs in Seattle. I'll say that over the years. Because you might have heard, I don't know, you might have heard 10, 12 songs of mine if you had. But if you listen to both episodes of La Bamba and maybe some others, and maybe the Patreon especially, you've been kind enough to let my guitar ramblings in the living room worm their way into your ears and your brain. And that gives me solace as well. Please support us by buying a Radish Mattress, or if not, if you don't need a mattress right now, and that's understandable, please go to some of the links in the description for this podcast or this YouTube video if you're listening on YouTube. There is a PayPal link if you would like to contribute some money to the fund that goes to me buying more books or just loose leaf tea. There's also links to some T-shirts that I made that are sort of defeatist messaging in brightly colored images. And there's a couple of social media links if you would just like to follow me. That would be great. I don't, it doesn't have to just be money. It's but if you do have a few extra bucks and you want to kick them my way in exchange for a extra podcast content that I do a lot of hard research on and do a lot of audiobook sort of narration, let's just say, about rock and roll, you can go join the Patreon in the link in the description. And it's something that I think you will feel was worth the time and the money. Even if you just go in for a month, download everything I've made so far. many hours over the last year or so. We have no other support. We have no ads. We have no benefactors. We have no producer. It's all just me doing this in my own weird, earnest, unprofessional way. If you'll be here, I'll be here. Okay? Be nice to yourself and be forgiving, because we'll all be at war with Mars very soon. Rock and roll is the best, and so are you.
Give me that, give me that, give me that, give me that thing, give me that, give me that, give me that thing, give me that, give me that, give me that thing.
No.
There's wickedness attempting to completely cover this nation in perversion and seductive, seducing spirits. I have never seen more images of more mermaids and water people in my life. That's a division in the kingdom of darkness, and they're highly technologically advanced.
He said, you bought a line on Raising Hell and Amazing Grace.